Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip back into a time when the dark wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Imagine it's the late 1600s and you've already said your prayers, wrapped yourself in a scratchy wool blanket, and are halfway asleep. Then bam, the sound you never wanted to hear, fists pounding on your wooden door at midnight. Your stomach lurches. You don't need anyone to explain what's happening. You've heard whispers all week. You probably won't survive this, but let's not rush ahead. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a quick note in the comments. What city are you in, and what time is it right now? I always like to picture who's out there with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The knock keeps rattling the door, louder, more urgent. A neighbour's voice calls your name, not with warmth, but with the chill of someone rehearsing it in church gossip for weeks. When you finally pull the door open, the night air cuts against your skin, damp and heavy. Two men from the village, eyes shining with both duty and fear, step forward. Behind them, you glimpse the pale faces of neighbours, some holding lanterns, others crossing themselves like they're guarding against whatever contamination you carry. You're told to come quietly. You notice how no one meets your eyes for more than a second. Even the woman who once borrowed your herbs for her sick child now stares at the ground, clutching her shawl tighter. You're not shackled, but the way they hover around you feels like invisible chains. Your house, your bed, your sense of safety, it all stays behind as you're marched into the cold night. As you walk, the sound of your bare feet against frozen dirt echoes too loudly in your ears. The village seems different, suddenly hostile. The same crooked fence posts, the same smell of smoke from the baker's oven, but now every detail feels sharpened into the suspicion. You catch the flicker of a curtain, someone spying, and quickly it drops back into darkness. Historically, this was the way it often started. Many accused witches weren't dragged by soldiers or officials, but by neighbours, even friends. Witch hunts weren't only legal spectacles, they were community-driven storms, fueled by fear and envy. In Salem, Massachusetts, for example, the majority of early accusations came from people who lived just a few doors away from their targets. So the person pointing at you wasn't some stranger, it was the woman who shared bread with you last winter, or this man who once asked for help mending his fence. That closeness is what made it sting. And here's a quirky fringe fact for you. Some people genuinely believed a witch could shoot curses through keyholes, meaning even a locked door couldn't protect you. So maybe that's why your neighbours didn't hesitate to break the midnight peace. They figured if they left you in your own bed too long, your spirit might just crawl out and cause trouble while your body stayed tucked in. Paranoia had its own weird logic. You stumble as a stone catches your toe, and the man on your left tightens his grip on your arm. You want to shout to demand an explanation, but you know the truth. Shouting won't save you. In fact, speaking too much might just confirm what they already suspect, that you're restless, defiant, unnatural. Silence, heavy and pressed against your tongue, feels safer. The group leads you past the church, its steeple silhouetted against a cloudy sky. The bell above hasn't rung yet tonight, but you know it will when they want the whole town to hear about your trial. For now, it looms over you like a witness. Scholars still debate how much of this hysteria was sincere belief versus political manoeuvring. Some historians argue that ordinary villagers truly feared dark magic in their midst. Others suggest witch hunts were convenient tools for removing troublesome people. Widows who owned property, midwives with too much knowledge, rivals in small-town feuds. And here you are, caught in the middle of that debate. A living example of how murky motives could be. You're finally herded into a small barn-like building on the edge of the square. It smells of hay, sweat, and wood smoke. A single lantern hangs from a beam, throwing shadows that twitch like figures waiting for their cue. Inside, you're told to sit on a rough bench while the men exchange nods, as though they've just accomplished something heroic. Your heart is still hammering, but a colder thought sinks in. They didn't come to ask questions. They came because a decision had already been made. Someone spoke your name in the right ear, and now here you are, breathing heavy in a room that doesn't feel like yours. Time slows. You have to hear the creak of the lantern chain, the shuffle of boots on straw, the faint mutter of people just outside. You wonder how quickly your life has unravelled. Yesterday you were stirring soup, muttering about how the firewood smoked too much. Tonight, you're the villain of a story told in whispers. And as you sit there, skin prickling, you realise that being accused isn't just about punishment. It's about being stripped of your place in the world. You're no longer you, you're now the accused witch, and that label stretches taller and louder than your own voice. Somewhere an owl hoots. The sound makes the men glance at each other uneasily. They don't say it, but you catch it in their faces. Even they aren't completely sure what they're doing. Fear is contagious. That's how witch hunts work. Fear passed hand to hand like a lantern in the night. The door thuds shut behind you. The smell of damp earth rises. For the first time you think about how this might end. And the possibilities are not kind. The barn door creaks open again, and you're pushed back out into the night. The air feels colder now, or maybe it's just you shivering harder. Your body knowing what your mind refuses to admit. The path winds through the village square, where shadows of homes lean in like nosy old women. Every window seems to hide someone watching, peeking between shutters. You swear you see glimmers of eyes, tiny glittering suspicions hovering in the dark. They're not supposed to be out this late, but curiosity has a way of dragging people out of bed. You've lived here long enough to know these people's faces by heart. The baker's wife, who always smelled faintly of flour and wood ash. The man with crooked teeth who traded eggs for your herbs in spring, children you've watched grow tall enough to carry buckets. But tonight, they're not neighbours anymore. Tonight, they're spectators, eager to confirm what they've already whispered over their porridge, that you're not entirely human, that something dangerous clings to you like smoke, is the watching that burns. Their gazes feel like needles on your skin, poking at every fault you never knew you had. Did you laugh too loudly last week when someone dropped a basket of apples? Did you stay indoors on a Sunday morning claiming a headache? Did you forget to greet old Mistress Webb at the well? These tiny things, meaningless in any other life, are now blooming into signs. The watching eyes gather them like kindling ready to spark. Historically, this constant scrutiny wasn't an exaggeration. During outbreaks of witch hysteria, communities became obsessed with observation. In Salem, neighbours testified about the smallest quirks, like someone humming oddly while churning butter or feeding a stray cat at dusk. That's how flimsy the line was. A woman's entire life could collapse because she owned one too many black chickens, or looked cross-eyed at the wrong moment. Everyday life became theatre, with the audience always waiting for the villain to slip. Here's the quirky fringe fact. Some people believed witches had an extra invisible eye that let them see at night. Not a glowing monster eye in the forehead, but an inner sight. Supposedly that's why they knew when storms were coming, or why they could spot herbs in the dark. Which means that when people stare at you now, they might not only be scared of what you've done, but of what they imagine you can see inside them. Imagine being accused of having X-ray gossip vision. A voice behind you mutters, "Don't look her in the eye," and suddenly half the group glances down at their boots. You realise they fear your gaze as much as your supposed curses. It gives you a strange hollow power, but it's the kind of power that makes them hate you more. The march halts by a torch-lit corner of the square. A small crowd has gathered. Some bundled in cloaks against the chill, others leaning forward like they're at a festival. Nobody speaks directly to you, but you hear your name hissed from mouth to mouth. You used to be neighbour, friend, maybe even aunt to the little ones. Now you're reduced to a syllable wrapped in suspicion. A woman coughs, and immediately someone beside her mutters, "She's already working." The accusation settles over you like a net. It doesn't matter that you did nothing. The fear sticks faster than truth, and in that moment you understand how impossible this fight will be. Scholars still debate the psychology of these hunts. Was it mass delusion, a sort of community panic that infected whole towns? Or was it cold calculation, people using fear to settle grudges, claim land, or silence outspoken women? Some argue both forces mixed together, like sour milk in bread dough, spoiling everything, impossible to separate once stirred. And in your situation, does the difference even matter? The eyes on you burn with both kinds of fire, genuine terror and petty vengeance. The captain of the watch, if you can call him that, announces that you'll be held until morning. His voice carries authority, but you hear the crack beneath it. He's afraid too, not of you exactly, but of what happens if he doesn't act against you. It's safer for him to throw you to the wolves than to risk their suspicion himself. You glance around the crowd once more. Most faces are unreadable masks, but you catch one expression. A girl you've known since she was small, staring at you with wide, frightened eyes. She doesn't speak, she doesn't wave, she just watches. And that, somehow, is worse than the muttering. You wonder if she'll dream tonight of the monster her parents tell her you are. Your body trembles, not just from cold, but from knowing this. Once a community starts watching you like this, it doesn't stop. Every cough, every frown, every slip of your foot will be catalogued. You've become the stage, and they'll keep staring until the final curtain drops. A torch sputters, sending sparks into the night. The men shove you forward again, leading you toward a low building where you'll be kept until dawn. Behind you, the crowd lingers, staring long after you've disappeared through the door. Those eyes, you'll carry them with you into the dark. The room they shove you into smells faintly of mildew and old straw. It isn't a proper cell, just an empty storage shed with a heavy bar across the door. A single crack in the wood lets in a thread of moonlight, enough for you to see the dust floating in the stale air. You lower yourself onto a lopsided stool, your knees aching, and try to still the shaking in your hands. You thought the worst part would be the cold, the humiliation, maybe even the threat of pain. But now you realise it's something quieter, the way a whisper can grow claws. Earlier today you were still part of the fabric of the town. You helped churn butter, traded gossip at the well, and scolded children when they teased the goats too much. But now the threads are unravelling, one rumour at a time. You try to trace how it started. Was it when your bread failed to rise at the last feast? Someone probably said your yeast was cursed, that your oven was touched by the devil's hand. Or maybe it was the way you muttered to yourself when you walked. Innocent chatter, to keep your mind busy, but to someone else maybe it sounded like spells. This is how gossip works. It doesn't need proof, it just needs repetition. One neighbour says, "I saw her talking to a crow." Another adds, "And wasn't her cow sickly last week?" Soon someone else remembers you looked sour when the minister preached about humility. Put together, these fragments become a monster bigger than you could ever fight. Gossip is the firewood. Fear is the spark. Historically, accusations often grew from the tiniest slights. In early modern Europe, one of the most common triggers for witchcraft accusations was failed bread or spoiled beer. If your loaf collapsed or your ale soured, it wasn't bad luck. It was someone cursing you. And usually, that someone was already a little unpopular, so maybe a little too independent, maybe just widowed or childless in a world that didn't trust either. Your bread falling flat could literally send you to trial. Imagine that, a bad baking day becoming a death sentence. And here's a quirky detail. In parts of Germany, people believed witches could steal milk from cows simply by tying knots in a rope. No cows required, no sneaking into barns, just a rope and a little muttered charm, and voila, your neighbour's dairy was doomed. Which meant if anyone saw you fiddling with string or twine, congratulations, you might be their number one suspect. Somewhere in the logic of fear, knots and butter churns became weapons. You lean your head against the wall, trying to keep from spiralling. But of course, the voices in your head keep reeling back. You remember Mistress Oldham complaining that you refused to lend her herbs last winter. She said you were protective of your plants. Maybe that story grew legs and wandered into tonight's accusations. You think of the minister's wife who once looked at you strangely after her child's fever broke while you whispered a psalm. Did she think you healed or cursed? You'll never know, because the version of you they've built in their heads is louder than anything you could ever explain. Scholars still argue about why communities turned on each other so viciously. Some point to economics, bad harvests, food shortages, and disease made people desperate to find a scapegoat. Others suggest it was about control. Women who lived outside the expected role of wife and mother were especially vulnerable. Maybe it was both. Hunger gnawed at the stomach while suspicion gnawed at the heart. But what you feel in this moment isn't an academic question. It's a knot in your chest, tight and hot, because you realise every part of your life is now a piece of evidence and you can't erase it. A rat scurries across the floor, bold enough to dart over your boot. You don't flinch. That's the cruel irony. If you scream, it proves your nerves are guilty. If you laugh, it proves you're unbothered, also guilty. If you sit stone still, it proves you're communing with dark forces. Gossip is a trap that sharpens itself on silence and noise alike. Your stomach growls, but food is the last thing on your mind. You think about how tomorrow, when you're brought before the town, people will repeat the rumours like they're gospel truth. Her cow died. Her eyes flashed red. Her bread turned sour. None of these things were your fault, but together they'll weave a noose. The image makes your breath catch. The night stretches on, each sound amplified. The drip of water from somewhere above, the scuff of boots outside the door, the occasional cough of a guard. And in the quiet you feel how alone you've become, not just in body but in story. Your neighbours are writing a tale where you're the villain, and they're the righteous ones. And what's worse, they'll believe it even after you're gone. You close your eyes and tell yourself, tomorrow you'll have to find a way to speak louder than the rumours. But even as you think it, you know the whispers have already outpaced you. Morning comes, not gently but with the shrill toll of the church bell. The sound seeps into your bones, rattling you awake from shallow, uneasy dreams. You had hoped daylight might make things feel less menacing, but instead it sharpens the edges. Shadows give way to faces, and those faces are not kind. When the door opens, the first thing you smell is damp earth mixed with smoke from hearth fires already lit across the village. Two men wait to escort you, not with force exactly, but with the stiff posture of people who want everyone to see they're on the right side of things. They lead you down the dirt path to the meeting house, where the minister's sermon has already begun. The church door groans open, and every head turns at once. That's the moment your stomach drops, because their stares don't just land on your clothes or your hair. They slide deeper, as if they're already stripping your soul bare. It's worse than shackles. You want to shrink, but your body refuses, frozen in the threshold. The minister doesn't stop when you're ushered inside. His voice booms louder, swelling with practiced fire. He speaks of Satan prowling like a lion, of wicked hearts hiding in plain sight. He says the devil works not through strangers but through neighbours, those you'd least expect. His words don't mention your name, but every head in the room tilts slightly toward you anyway. It's as if the sermon is your obituary, already being written while you still breathe. Historically, this wasn't unusual. Preachers played a huge role in fueling the witch hunts, their sermons weaving fear into every corner of daily life. They drew on scripture about sorcery and rebellion, warning that witches were real threats hiding among God's people. Sometimes entire hunts began after one fiery sermon. In Salem, Reverend Samuel Parris's relentless preaching about spiritual warfare set the tone for what followed. So when you sit there in that hard wooden pew, you're not just enduring a sermon, you're sitting through a trial disguised as worship. Your mind drifts back to the smaller moments that might have led here. Last spring, when you muttered about how the frost ruined your herbs, did someone think you were cursing the weather? When you told the baker's boy to stop stealing apples, did he go home and say you looked at him with fire in your eyes? That's all it takes. Scraps of memory reinterpreted under the minister's thunder. Here's the quirky fringe fact. In some places, it was believed witches couldn't recite the Lord's Prayer without stumbling. So ministers would make accused people say it aloud in church, waiting for a stutter, or skipped word as proof of guilt. Imagine being dragged half asleep, terrified, with a crowd glaring at you, and then expected to deliver a flawless performance of prayer. Your voice cracking wasn't a human mistake, it was Satan's signature. The sermon rolls on, painting pictures of eternal flames, of souls chained forever. Each phrase coils around your chest until you feel your lungs shrinking. The words burned at the stake don't even need to be said. They hang unspoken, as clear as the smoke wafting from the candles. Children glance at you with wide eyes, and their hands clutch tight to their mother's skirts, as though they might catch your supposed wickedness if they get too close. Scholars debate how much of this was sincere faith and how much was theatre. Were ministers truly terrified, or were they wielding fear to maintain authority? Some argue that preachers leaned into witch trials to prove their own power, to show they could protect the flock from hidden wolves. Others believe they were just as frightened as their congregations, using sermons as shields against the unknown. Either way, the result was the same. You sitting here, feeling like every word is aimed at your heart. The congregation begins humming a hymn, voices low and trembling. You don't join in. Your throat feels locked. Your lips press tight. Someone notices, of course, they always notice, and you catch a whispered comment. She cannot sing with God's children. The gossip spreads like smoke wrapping around the rafters. You sit rigid, trying not to move, because anything you do will confirm their suspicions. When the sermon ends, the minister's gaze finally lands on you. His eyes linger just long enough to freeze your spine. He doesn't point, doesn't shout, but his silence is worse. It's permission for the villagers to keep watching you, to keep adding to the pile of accusations. You're no longer a person in their eyes, you're an object lesson, a living warning. As the people file out, you feel their glances slide over you like knives. Some look triumphant, others uneasy, but none offer comfort. Even the ones you once called friends hurry past as though brushing against you might stain their souls. The church door swings shut and the echo leaves you with one heavy thought. This isn't about evidence anymore. It's about belief. And belief is harder to fight than chains. When you finally step out of the church, the sunlight feels thin and brittle, as though it might snap if you reach for it. People scatter quickly, but you can hear them murmuring in clumps just beyond earshot, letting their words drift like smoke that clings to your skin. You try not to listen, but the syllables still pierce. Strange, unnatural, danger. Once, these same voices would have asked you for salt, for healing herbs, or for help with a sick child. Now they're weaving a new story about you, one where you poison, not heal. You walk back toward your home under the watchful eyes of neighbours pretending not to stare. Your door is slightly ajar, though you know you locked it before being dragged away last night. Inside, the room feels different, like a stranger has been rummaging through it. Your bread dough still sits on the table, flat and lifeless. Normally, you'd shrug and start again, but today the lump of flour feels like another nail in your coffin. Bread that doesn't rise. It sounds trivial, laughable even, but you know better. A failed loaf is fuel for gossip. Someone will say the devil sucked the air out of your dough. Another will say you whispered curses into spread. That's how fragile life has become. Your kitchen mistakes can echo like accusations in the square. Historically, this was common. Food was sacred in a world where famine was always one bad season away, so any disruption in bread, beer or milk became suspicious. A flat loaf wasn't just a baking mishap, it was evidence of unnatural tampering. In some cases, women were accused because their cheese curdled too quickly, or their butter refused to churn. These everyday frustrations were reimagined as proof of witchcraft. Think about that. You could be hauled before a court because your cow had a stomachache. And here's the quirky fringe fact. In parts of Eastern Europe, people believed witches could steal the goodness out of food. Not poison it, just suck out the life force. So bread baked by a witch would look normal, but leave a family hungry no matter how much they ate. Imagine chewing loaf after loaf and never feeling full. To people already teetering onto starvation, that was scarier than outright poison. You sit at the table staring at the useless dough when the door creaks. It's a neighbour woman, one you once shared berries with during harvest. She doesn't cross the threshold. Instead, she stands half inside, her eyes scanning your shelves, your herbs drying by the rafters, the small charms you've tied with string. Her voice is clipped as she says, "You should be careful what you keep." She doesn't wait for your answer, just pulls the door shut behind her. It's not advice, it's a warning. You realise then that every item in your house could be twisted against you. Herbs for tea, witches' potions, knotted string, binding curses, a broken spoon, a tool for summoning. Your home isn't a sanctuary anymore. It's a stage set where props can turn into evidence. Scholars debate whether these suspicions came from genuine fear or simple resentment. Was it truly about demons, or was it jealousy of women who knew how to make medicines, who could survive without constant help? Some historians argue that witchcraft was just a convenient label, slap-bad on independence. If you lived slightly outside the village's approval, it didn't take much for your bread dough or your herb jars to become weapons against you. The afternoon drags. You try to busy your hands, but even small motions feel risky. You catch yourself muttering a little rhyme as you sweep, the same nonsense verse your mother taught you as a child. Then you freeze. If anyone heard you, they'd swear it was a spell. You clamp your mouth shut, realizing even your own memories have turned dangerous. By evening, the smell of other people's bread wafts through the air. Their loaves are rising, golden and whole. You wonder if they've already told each other that yours didn't. You picture them laughing around their hearth, saying, "Of course her bread failed, what else could you expect?" The thought burrows into you deeper than hunger. As night closes in, you sit by the dim glow of a candle. The flame flickers, and for a second you think about how they'd spin this too. A dancing light, a strange shadow, evidence of a pact with darkness. It doesn't matter what you do. The story has already begun, and you're only the unwilling actor. The next morning you wake to the sound of children's laughter outside your window. For a fleeting moment, it feels normal. Just kids playing in the dirt road, chasing each other with the sticks. But then you catch a word. Your name. It freezes you more than the chill air seeping through the cracks. You edge closer to the window and see them. A group of boys and girls pointing toward your house. One girl is crying, rubbing her arm. A boy puffs out his chest and shouts, "She touched me in my dream!" The others look at him like he's just uttered the bravest confession in history. You back away from the window, your chest tightening. Dreams. That's all it takes. Children claim to see you in their nightmares, and suddenly you're no longer a woman who once baked pies for them. You're a shadow in their sleep. The pointing finger of a child weighs more than all your denials. You can't defend yourself against the private theatre of their minds. Historically, children were often the spark that lit entire witch hunts ablaze. In Salem, it was the strange fits and visions of young girls that launched the frenzy. Their cries of being pinched or choked by invisible hands turned into a tidal wave of accusations. Adults believed them without question, because children were seen as innocent vessels, too pure to invent such horrors. If a child said they saw you consorting with the devil, that was gospel truth, no matter how absurd the claim. And here's the quirky fringe fact. Some trial records show kids claiming they saw accused witches flying through the air, sometimes riding sticks, sometimes carried by animals, even once clinging to the tail of a pig. Yes, a pig. Try arguing your way out of that in court. No matter how ridiculous the story, the crowd would nod along. After all, who would accuse a child of lying? You sit back on your stool, hands trembling. You think about all the times you've helped these children. The fever you soothed with willow bark tea. The scraped knees you cleaned with water from your well. Those kindnesses are gone now, rewritten as evidence of something darker. If a child cried after drinking your tea, that was your poison. If they healed, that was your spell. Either way, you lose. The sound of the children fades as they scatter down the road, leaving only the echo of your name hanging in the air. You try to convince yourself it is just a game, that by tomorrow they'll be chasing butterflies instead of shadows, but deep down you know better. A child's voice will be carried to adults, retold with more conviction each time, until it lands in the ears of someone ready to act. Scholars debate why children were so central to these hunts. Some argue the girls in Salem were reacting to the crushing pressures of their society, finding a way to seize attention in a world that ignored them. Others suggest their behaviour was shaped by illness, hysteria, or even ergot poisoning from spoiled rye bread. Still others think the children simply realised their words held power, and power is intoxicating at any age. Whatever the cause, the effect was devastating. Entire communities willing to hang neighbours on the trembling testimony of children. By midday, a knock rattles your door again. Not fists this time, just a polite rap. You open it to find a pale-faced woman clutching her daughter's hand. The girl looks at you like you're a monster stepping out of a storybook. The mother doesn't meet your eyes as she mutters, "Best stay inside for now." Her voice shakes with both pity and fear. Then she hurries away, dragging the child along. You stand there in the doorway, exposed to the chill air, realising what she really meant. Stay hidden, because the more they see you, the more fuel you give them. But hiding won't save you either. It only makes the whispers grow louder. In a world where innocence is defined by children's tears and trembling, you've already lost the battle before it began. That night, as you try to sleep, you hear your name again, not from children this time, but from the voices of adults drifting through the square. The accusations are gaining weight, stacking on top of each other. You close your eyes and wish for silence, but even in your dreams, small hands keep pointing at you, steady as the moon. They come at dawn with that particular brand of politeness that feels like a blade wrapped in cloth. "You'll submit to a search," one of the men says, which is almost funny, because there's not a version of this where you actually get to say no. You're led to a side room behind the meeting house, a little space that smells like cold wood and old soap. Two matrons are waiting, women you know, women whose hands you've held during fever and childbirth. Today those hands are brisk and businesslike, as if they're tidying a pantry. You're sure it's too late that your body, not your words, is on trial. They keep their eyes fixed on your face like they're trying to look dignified while stepping over a line everyone pretends isn't there. They explain the rules. They'll look for marks, moles, scars, anything unnatural. They say it's for your own good, to prove your innocence quickly. That would be adorable if it weren't so upside down. You're guided to a stool, sir. "It'll be easier if you don't resist," one whispers, the way you might whisper to a skittish horse. You nod because you've learned that every flinch will be pathologized. The room is too bright, or maybe your skin is just too awake to every gust of air. They start with your hands, turning them palm up, palm down, studying the lines like fortune tellers in reverse. They move to your arms, tracing old scratches and healed burns from years of cooking and garden work. Each ordinary blemish looks guilty under their gaze. A raised mole? They call it curious, a faded scar, unaccounted for. Your life on your sen suddenly reads like a confession you never wrote. Historically, this was standard procedure. Searchers, often older women appointed by the court, were tasked with finding a witch's mark, sometimes called the devil's mark. In early modern Europe and in places like Scotland and colonial New England, the presence of an odd mole or a numpatch could be presented as proof you'd sealed a pact with something unfriendly. Professional witch prickers even toured towns, sticking needles into suspicious spots. If you didn't feel pain or bleed, that was taken as confirmation. Many scholars note that some prickers used retractable needles, little trick devices that vanished into the handle, so the point seemed to sink in without resistance. Magic. Or, a spring-loaded fraud. One matron clears her throat and says they're going to check less visible places. The words hang there like steam over hot water. You focus on a knot in the wall, a little swirl of grain that looks like a sleeping snail, and you let your mind shrink to that safe small spiral. You've helped deliver babies. You know bodies aren't shameful, but this is different. This is your body being read aloud to a room that wants a horror story. The women murmur to each other in careful tones, as if quiet language can make this feel cleaner, and you breathe in counts of 7, trying to keep your ribs steady. Here's the quirky fringe fact. Many communities believed a witch had a special extra nipple, the witch's teat, used to suckle animal familiars. Cats, toads, ferrets, sometimes things with names like Vinegar Tom or Pyewacket. Yes, they genuinely thought invisible imps clocked in for snack time. A skin tag, a flea bite, even a healing boil could be rebranded as a teat. People didn't need science. They had stories that fit like gloves. And once a story fits, it sticks. They bring out a pin. It's small, almost dainty, which makes it worse. "We must test," the matron says. The tip stings as they prick your forearm, then your shoulder, then the place just above your collarbone. You wince because you're human, and they nod, satisfied. Then they try a spot on your hip where you've been numb since that winter you fell on the ice. The pin kisses skin, and you barely feel it. The matrons share a look that says, "There." The room seems to tilt a degree toward the gallows. You could explain the fall, the ache that never left, but everyone knows explanations are just sorcery with punctuation. Scholars still debate what was really going on with these insensible spots. Some argue nerves deadened by injury or repeated pricking could go temporarily numb. Others suggest the adrenaline of terror can dull pain, your body, bless it, doing triage. There's also the theory that confirmation bias did most of the heavy lifting. If people expected not to see blood, they somehow didn't see blood. And then there's the less charitable view. Some examiners cheated because outcomes kept their reputations oiled and their purses full. The line between belief and performance is not a line so much as a messy ink blot. They keep cataloguing you, their whispers a ledger. Small mole, brown. Scar, old. Mark, faintly blue. You can feel the narrative congealing. That faintly blue patch. A bruise from the barrel you lifted yesterday. That brown mole, yours since childhood. But in this room, context is contraband. Even your freckles feel like spies. You want to laugh at the absurdity, to say, if the devil's so efficient, why am I still living in a drafty cottage with a cranky oven? But humour is dangerous here. Jokes are irreverence, and irreverence is treason. The door opens just enough for a man in a plain coat to slide in, pretending not to look. He pretends poorly. He asks if the touch test has been done, the ritual where the afflicted child is brought in, and if your hand calms their fits, that's supposedly evidence you bewitched them in the first place. It's a lose-lose logic loop so tight you could hang from it. The matrons say not yet. He nods and leaves, but not before glancing at the pin in their hands like it's a sacrament. You're instructed to stand, turn, lift your hair. They check your scalp, your neck, behind your ears. The air on your skin feels like a chorus of little cold mouths breathing doubt. You pick one detail to anchor you. A sunbeam crawling across the floorboard, slowly swallowing a chalk mark near the stool. You decide that when it reaches the leg, you'll be done. It's a child's bargain with time, but it works enough to keep your knees from shaking. Another historical fact. Matthew Hopkins, the self-styled witchfinder general in 1640s England, made the pricking test and prolonged watching infamous, keeping suspects awake for days to see if familiars would appear to feed at the witch's mark. Sleep deprivation makes anyone see things in corners, And in towns already primed with dread, a moth became a messenger from hell. The methods travelled, morphed, and resurfaced whenever a community wanted clean lines between us and the threat. Your mourning sadly is part of a very old template. When they finally step back, there's a pause that tastes like iron. The matrons thank you with stiff mouths. One of them, the softer one, presses a folded cloth into your hand for the pinpricks. She doesn't say, "I'm sorry, Sabu," but her fingers do. The other writes down a few notes for the record, finishing with a dot that feels like a tiny hammer blow. The room exhales. You realise you haven't. You dress with careful hands and the practiced grace of someone who refuses to give them the satisfaction of seeing you scramble. As you fasten your laces, you rehearse answers for questions that they will definitely not ask. Yes, that scar is from your sister's goat. Yes, that mole belonged to your grandmother's face too. No, you haven't hosted midnight tea for a toad. You smooth your sleeves, a small ceremony of sovereignty over the skin they just turned into a map of crimes. There's one more debate rattling around the edges of your mind, something historians still argue about. Were these searches mainly about fear of the devil, or were they about disciplining bodies, especially women's bodies, in public view? A controlled humiliation. Some say both. Sometimes a culture doesn't know how to name its anxieties, so it scripts them onto the nearest flesh. That flesh, inconveniently, happens to be yours. When you step back into the corridor, the world seems louder, rawer. You can hear the village outside, the cluck of hens, the thunk of a cartwheel, someone laughing too brightly. You wake them in 100 tiny points, the cartography of suspicion stinging under your clothes. The matrons tell you to wait. The magistrate will decide the next step, a gorg. You nod as if this is a normal errand, as if you'll be home in time to check the bread. But you already know the truth. Once a community draws on your skin with its trembling, righteous pen, the ink doesn't wash off. They don't call it a test, they call it assurance, like the word can knit a blanket over the nerves screaming under your skin. The order comes quick. Efficient. You'll be taken to the pond. Someone says it in the same tone you'd use to announce a washing day. You look at their faces, some careful, some eager, and realise as the village is about to do laundry with your body, scrub it against cold water until the truth supposedly bleeds out. You remember the pinpricks, the way the matron's eyes slid past your explanations, and think, of course the next proof comes from something as indifferent as a pond. The path is rutted and familiar, past the mill and the alder trees, where children once played at pirates. Today those alders look like judges, tall and unamused. A wind moves through them with a paper-dry hiss. People follow at a distance, the way they'd follow a wedding procession or a funeral. Same hunger for a story, just a different costume. You catch a glimpse of the baker's boy, the same one you scolded for apples. He stares at your bound hands and swallows, undecided between pity and thrill. The world smells of damp earth and old leaves, and under that, a tin thread of fear you can taste on your tongue. By the water's edge, two men check a coil of rope like sailors about to cast off. Thumbs to toes, one says, and your stomach drops because you've heard the phrase. They cross your wrists, your ankles, and bind them together behind your back so your body forms a tight arc. The knot bites. Someone murmurs a prayer that is not for you, it's for the spectacle. A woman presses a sprig of something, Rowan, you think, into her pocket, as if a charm against splashback guilt. Here is the tidy logic they believe. Water is pure. It rejects the impure. So if you float, the water is spitting you out. Proof you're allied with what swims below, not what shines above. If you sink, you're innocent. Which, yes, presents a tiny problem for the innocent who also enjoy breathing. Historically, this swimming was used across parts of early modern Europe, and in some English cases, especially under the Brand Building, men like Matthew Hopkins in the 1640s. Courts often frowned on it, plainly illegal in some jurisdictions, yet communities did it anyway, the way fear likes to overrule footnotes. In the colonies, the practice appears far less common, sometimes attempted by neighbours rather than magistrates. Legality didn't exactly stand in the way of a good panic. Your toes curl inside your shoes at the first lick of water. They make a little ceremony of it, which is almost kind if you don't listen too closely. One man announces how long you'll be in. Another holds the free end of the rope like a fisherman about to brag. A child whimpers behind a mother's skirts. The mother shushes her without looking away. You catch the minister in the crowd, eyelids heavy with purpose. His presence tells the story before your body does. They lower you. There's a slap of cold up your shins, your knees, your hips, A clean slice of knife cold that steals thoughts and replaces them with a single imperative. Breathe. The rope tightens. Your spine screams. Water hugs your ribs, then your shoulders. You bite your tongue, partly from shock, partly because no sound you make here will be read as human. The surface breaks over your mouth, your nose, and suddenly the world is a wet bell ringing, all sound warped and distant. You float for half a heartbeat as the trapped air in your clothes lifts you. Then you feel the shove of hands, the tug of the rope, the pond negotiating with gravity and superstition. Zik shows up like a quiet friend you wish were louder. Clothing can trap air, a body arched and bound increases buoyancy. Cold water locks muscles and makes you stiff as a board, which, yes, can float. But none of that matters to the shore. From there, things look simple. You're rising. A murmur rustles the crowd like wind in wheat. You imagine the clerk's quill somewhere, scratching future you into hard lines. She did not sink. A fact, neat as a coffin. Here's your quirky fringe fact. In some places, through a different fairness ritual, towns weighed suspects against set measures, sometimes even against huge Bibles, a sort of moral scale to see if wickedness made you suspiciously light. The Dutch town of Oudewater became famous for fair weighings that cleared people with official certificates, a bureaucratic blessing in an age of ghosts. People travelled there hoping a scale could rescue what rumours had ruined. Imagine carrying a piece of parchment that says, essentially not a witch, stamped by a tidy clerk with the good penmanship. Paper armour. Someone shouts, "See, see," and the word leaps from mouth to mouth like sparks. You bob, the rope creaking through a gloved hand, your chin scraping the surface where the pond skin feels slick as oil. Something brushes your ankle, weed probably, and your body panics anyway. An animal inside you clawing for a ladder that isn't there. Your lungs are bargaining in quick, messy math. A sip of air now for a cough later. You steal a breath, water licking your lips, and hear laughter from the bank, too bright for the grey day. Scholars still argue about the role this ritual played. Was it sincere theology, water as a baptised judge, or was it primarily theatre, a public humiliation designed to cement conformity? Some say it functioned as community therapy, a way to pour collective dread into a single containable scene. Others insist it was simple coercion, a spectacle that manufactured guilt out of physics and cold. And sitting here, half boy, half person, you feel like a prop in someone else's argument about meaning. If there's a lesson for the crowd, it is written in your shivering. They haul you up enough to show the drip from your hair, then let you down again. As if the pond is a question they can ask repeatedly until it yields the answer they've already circled in red. You lose the feeling in your fingers, a ringing starts in your ears. The ministers of your childhood taught that water cleanses. Today it's scrubbing you out of your own story. You think of yesterday's dough, collapsed and sulking in its bowl. You think of the pin, finding that numb place in your hip like a crow finding shine. You think of a child's trembling finger, and how the village chose to see a dagger in it. The pond is only the latest translator of their fear. Same script, different the stage. A man with a scar at his jaw leans forward, the rope biting his palms, and asks if you're ready to confess. The word confess floats above you like a gull that will not leave. It promises scraps and gives you none. Confess what? The ponds are cold, crowds are hungry, and a breath is a coin you're running out of. You close your eyes, not noble, just tired, and save your answer for a place where your mouth works. Historically, some accuse people did confess after this, and not because water converted them. Cold, shame, and the math of survival can do strange, efficient work. Others name names, spreading the net in the most human of ways. If drowning alone is inevitable, someone else might as well be dragged to the shore with you. The record books tidy this into lines and dates, but from inside the rope and chill, it is just the raw fact of wanting to live 5 minutes longer. They pull you out at last, a slick creature coughing up pond and bile. The world smears, then sharpens. The alder leaves, the tight mouths, the minister's eyes like shuttered windows. Someone throws a blanket over your shoulders, coarse wool that rasps your skin, and the kindness almost breaks you more than the dunking. It declares you human for 3 heartbeats before memory reclassifies you as Exhibit A again. The verdict is not shouted. It doesn't need to be. The crowd disperses with the soft relief of people who've seen something decisive. The rope comes off. The bruise stays. You stand on uncooperative legs and feel the shape of your future narrowing. Hallway after hallway of tests that always end with the same door. Behind you, the pond goes back to being a pond. It reflects the sky, a trick you can't help envying. They dry you by the fire in a small room beside the meeting house, the flames crackling loud enough to drown out your coughing. Your clothes cling damp and sour, your skin smelling faintly of algae and rope. You keep thinking of the pond, how its surface swallowed you up without protest, how your own body betrayed you by bobbing. That image is already living in your neighbours' mouths, retold with each sip of ale or turn of bread. You can almost hear it. She floated. We all saw it. And no amount of warmth from this fire can thaw the ice in your chest. The magistrate arrives later, brisk and heavy with the importance of his coat. He doesn't bother asking how you feel. He unrolls a parchment, clears his throat and announces the next accusation, that you've signed the devil's book. He says it like announcing rain after clouds. Inevitable. The murmurs from the onlookers feed him. Every word he delivers fattened by their nods. A ledger of souls, they whisper, where your name is written in ink that burns. You want to laugh. You've signed no book, not even the parish register, since you never learned your letters well enough. The only book you've touched lately was a Bible borrowed from a friend, its leather cover cracked and soft from years of hands. But logic doesn't matter here. The devil's book is not about literacy, it's about imagination. They imagine you signing, and so you must have. Historically, the devil's book was a frequent accusation in witch trials, a convenient shorthand for an invisible crime. Testimonies claimed suspects wrote their names in blood, often during a midnight meeting with the devil himself, who sometimes appeared as a man, sometimes as a black dog, sometimes as a goat with burning eyes. It was less about evidence and more about storytelling, the ultimate contract that explained how ordinary neighbours could wield supernatural harm. If crops failed or children sickened, it wasn't random chance, it was your unholy signature at work. Here's the quirky fringe fact. Some trial records describe the devil's book as having moving letters, signatures that squirmed across the page like insects. Others claimed it was bound in the skin of the damned. Of course, nobody ever produced this book in court. It remained an imagined artifact, a phantom prop waved like a dagger above the accused. Yet entire verdicts rested on its existence. The magistrate peers at you with the satisfied air of someone who's already won the argument. You need only admit it, he says, and mercy may yet be shown. Mercy, in his mouth, tastes like ash. You know what he means. Confess and perhaps you'll live, though life would come shackled with shame, forced to accuse others just to crawl back into daylight. Deny it and the rope waits. You wonder if the devil himself, if such a figure ever bothered to wander through this damp village, would even want your name. You with your cracked hands and failed bread. You with your drafty roof and your aching hip. Hardly the glamorous consort of legends. The absurdity almost makes you grin, but you bite it back. Smiles are dangerous currency here. They can be read as insolence or secret knowledge. The magistrate continues, painting a picture of your supposed midnight pact. He describes candles lit in the woods, chants in a tongue you've never heard, a quill pressed to your palm until blood flowed. The crowd leans in, hungry for the theatre. And you feel yourself shrinking beneath the weight of their belief. Their eyes don't just watch you, they rewrite you word by word until you are no longer the woman you were yesterday. You're a character now, trapped in their morality play. Scholars debate how much the devil's book was meant literally, and how much symbolically. Was it really believed to exist? Or was it simply a metaphor for sin, dramatised until the metaphor became flesh? Some suggest it was a way for courts to formalise guilt. No need for messy explanations when you could point to a cosmic contract. Others argue the book was less about theology and more about control, an elegant way to demand confession, since no one could disprove what no one had seen. You sit there, your damp skirt steaming near the fire, and realise the trap closing around you. If you deny, you look stubborn. If you confess, you prove their story. Either way, your fate is inked. If not in the devil's book, then in the courts. The magistrate clears his throat again and asks, almost casually, "Do you remember the night you signed?" His words slither like smoke. He doesn't ask if, he asks when. Your silence stretches long enough to make the fire pop. Outside you hear footsteps crunching in the dirt, the normal rhythm of village life continuing, as though nothing inside this room matters, but you know tomorrow those footsteps will echo with new gossip. She hesitated. She couldn't deny it. The magistrate finally sighs, as though you've disappointed him personally. He rolls up his parchment, nods to the guards, and leaves the fire sputtering in his wake. You're hauled back to your stool, dripping and sore, while whispers swirl behind you like gnats. The book you never touched is already heavy in your lap, its imagined pages sealing shut around your name. They give you no time to breathe. Word spreads faster than smoke, and by afternoon, the air in the village tastes sharp with suspicion. You're not paraded this time, just escorted. 2 men walking close, their elbows brushing yours like walls of bone. You know where they're leading you before the road even curves. It isn't the pond, thank God. It's worse. It's the square. The crowd is already waiting. Scattered like crows on fence posts. They don't shout, they don't need to. Their silence is thicker than noise. At the centre, a wooden stool has been dragged into place. You recognise it, borrowed from the inn, one of the stools you once sat on while listening to fiddles. Now it's a stage. They motion you to sit, and you obey because what else is left? Faces blur together, but you pick out the familiar. Mistress Webb, whose goat you once helped birth twins, the cooper's wife, whose boy you bandaged when he split his chin, the friend who shared broth with you last winter, when your cough rattled so bad you thought you'd break. Today they keep their distance as though kindness is catching. Each time you glance at one, they turn away. It feels like doors slamming shut in your chest. That's the cruelest part. It's the turning. Friends who once shared secrets now act as though you're poison. They can't afford to stand beside you because suspicion is contagious. If they defend you, they risk being accused themselves. Better to edge back, to tighten their shawls and look through you as if you were already a ghost. You've been left alone before, but never like this. This isn't solitude. This is abandonment shaped like survival. Historically, isolation was part of the process. The accused were not only locked in cells, but socially exiled long before judgment. Neighbours who once relied on your help suddenly crossed the street to avoid you. Family members sometimes turned witness, convinced that saving themselves required severing you. In Salem, husbands testified against wives, children against parents, friends against friends. That betrayal stung deeper than the formal trial, because it wasn't law that condemned you, it was the people you loved. A quirky fringe fact: in some German towns, there were even fines for showing sympathy to the accused. If you offered them food or comfort, you risked punishment yourself. Imagine that. Compassion outlawed, empathy turned into contraband. No wonder your neighbours can't meet your eyes. It isn't just fear of you, it's fear of the noose tightening by association. You sit on the stool, every heartbeat echoing in your ears. Someone coughs, a child whispers. Then the minister steps forward, his robe shifting like a shadow come to life. He doesn't address you by name. Instead, he speaks to the crowd, voice smooth as a whetstone. He warns them of hidden corruption, of Satan's subtle snares. Each phrase glances off you like arrows, yet sticks all the same. The people nod, drinking in every word, their agreement a wall you can't climb. You glance toward the edge of the crowd and see him, your oldest friend. Once, you two gathered berries together, laughed over silly songs, shared bread. Today he looks right at you, then lowers his gaze to the dirt, that's all. Not a word, not a shake of the head, not even a whisper. Just absence dressed as presence. The kind of betrayal that doesn't scream, it shrugs. And somehow that hurts more. Scholars debate whether this was true belief or social strategy. Did people genuinely convince themselves their loved ones were bewitched? Or did they betray them as a shield against suspicion? Some historians argue both. Fear so strong it rewrote memory. When everyone around you insisted they saw the devil's hand, it became easier to believe than to resist. Human minds bend quickly when survival is the prize. You tell yourself not to cry, because tears could be twisted into proof. They'll say you weep because the devil is abandoning you. They'll say you weep because your tricks are failing. You force your eyes dry staring at a crack in the stool leg. That little flaw in the wood becomes your anchor, a reminder that even something ordinary carries scars. The minister finishes, and the crowd disperses in slow ripples. Nobody speaks to you, nobody touches you. The guards untie your wrists, then tie them again. An unnecessary ritual, but one that reminds everyone who you are now. As they lead you away, you hear whispers behind you. Not shouts, just low words, like embers that refuse to die out. They don't need volume. They have conviction. Back in your cell, the straw feels scratchier, the walls closer. You think about the faces you saw today, the way they turned, the way they didn't. You realise loneliness has changed shape. It isn't the absence of people. It's the presence of people who no longer claim you. The cell they keep you in now isn't even pretending to be a room. It's stone pressed together with damp mortar, the kind that always sweats with cold no matter the season. There are no windows, only a slit near the ceiling where air squeezes through, carrying the scent of smoke from chimneys above. The floor is dirt, tamped hard by other feet that shuffled here before yours. You can trace their ghosts in the grooves, each line a reminder that this place is a waiting room for endings. You lower yourself to the corner where straw has been scattered, though calling it bedding is generous. It smells of mould, and when you press your palm to it, you feel the damp creep into your bones. The chains aren't heavy, just a single shackle around your ankle, attached to an iron ring in the wall. It doesn't stop you from moving, really. It just reminds you every moment that you're tethered. The restraint isn't about strength, it's about symbolism. The silence is the loudest thing here. Every drip of water from the ceiling lands like a drumbeat. Every scuttle of a rat becomes thunder in the emptiness. Your own breath feels too sharp, too obvious. You want to hum to drown it out, but humming would sound like chanting, and you don't even trust your own noise anymore. So you sit with the silence and it grows heavier, pressing against your ribs. Historically, cells like these were the staging ground for witch trials. Many accused were kept in isolation, not because it was secure, but because isolation broke the spirit faster than shackles. Records from England, Germany, and New England show that the longer someone was held alone in cold, damp rooms, the more likely they were to confess. Not because guilt bloomed, but because loneliness did. Humans aren't meant for silence this thick. It warps thoughts until even lies feel like relief. A quirky fringe fact: in some towns it was believed that witches couldn't cry in confinement. Tears, they said, were the property of the innocent. So guards would watch, waiting for a sob that never came, or dismissing the ones that did as crocodile tears from the devil's brood. Imagine that, your body's most natural response treated as evidence either way. You cry? Proof. You don't cry? Also proof. A trap tighter than any chain. You stretch your legs, the shackle clinking, and stare at the slit of light above. Dust drifts through it like slow snow. You imagine what's outside, children carrying buckets, women shaking rugs, men chopping wood. Life continues as if you're already erased. Maybe that's the point. They're rehearsing a world without you, one chore at a time. The silence deepens into something strange. You start to notice patterns, the way the drips from the ceiling line up with your heartbeat, the way the air whistles in a rhythm like distant song. Your mind begins filling in gaps, inventing companions where none exist. You think of your mother's voice, the lullabies she hummed. For a moment you hear it clearly, soft against the stone, until you remember she's been gone for years. That's the trick of solitude. It gives you comfort, and then yanks it away. Scholars debate whether these hallucinations, these bending of senses, played into the confessions recorded. Did people truly believe they spoke to spirits in their cells? Or were they just starved for sound and invented company? Some argue the darkness bred visions so vivid that even the accused believed them. Others think interrogators simply exploited the half-dream state of sleepless, malnourished prisoners. Either way, the cell became both stage and actor, crafting evidence out of silence. You curl tighter into the straw, the cold has settled in your marrow, a persistent ache that makes your bones feel older than they are. You wonder if this is what the records will say of you. Held for questioning, kept in confinement. Words neat enough to hide the way your teeth chatter, the way your stomach gnaws itself, the way your thoughts fray at the edges. The ledger won't mention that. History always edits out the discomfort. At some point you doze, only to wake with a start at the sound of a rat skittering too close. You fling a handful of straw at it, and it vanishes into the dark. For a second you almost miss it. Even vermin counts as company here. You laugh once. A bitter sound that bounces off the stone and comes back sounding like someone else. You cover your mouth quickly, afraid the guards outside will hear, and decide your laughter proves something sinister. The hours stretch until they feel like years. The light in the slit shifts, fading until only darkness remains. You lie back staring into the black and realizes that the silence has become a kind of companion. Cruel, suffocating, but steady. You hate it, but you also fear the moment it breaks. because when it breaks, it will be with footsteps, with questionings, with accusations sharpened into spears. For now, there's only you, the damp stone, and the weight of eyes that aren't even here. You close your own eyes and breathe carefully, reminding yourself you are still here, still human, even as the silence does its best to convince you otherwise. Night in the cell is a predator of its own. You thought the daylight hours dragged, but darkness has a different appetite. It crawls over your skin, settles in your lungs, makes the small space feel infinite and crushing at once. You try to measure time by the drips of water, but after the 100th splash, your count collapses into nonsense. Your body is tired enough to sleep, but your mind refuses. Every time your eyes close, you see faces, neighbours, children, the minister, looming in the dark with outstretched fingers, pointing and whispering. When the door creaks, you nearly leap. A guard steps in, holding a lantern that makes the walls shiver with light. Behind him comes another man, one you know only too well, the constable who arrested you. He doesn't carry chains this time. Instead, he carries words. He says they only want to talk, to give you a chance to clear your conscience. The phrase sounds soft, but you hear the blade hidden in it. They sit across from you, the lantern between you all. Its flame sputters, as if even fire is nervous here. The constable leans in. "You've been named," he says, "and dreams don't lie." You know what he means. Those children with their visions, those women with their whispered suspicions. In this world, a dream is as binding as a deed. You open your mouth to protest, but his gaze pins you shut. The questions begin small. Do you pray every night? Do you attend service faithfully? Have you ever muttered strange words over herbs or animals? Each answer feels like walking through a maze where every turn is a dead end. If you say yes, they'll twist it into ritual. If you say no, they'll call you godless. Your memory betrays you, tugging forward every muttered rhyme, every skipped sermon when the weather ached your bones, every half-forgotten prayer said wrong. Each scrap becomes a dagger in their hands. Historically, interrogations blurred the line between conversation and coercion. Records show how questions were asked over and over until suspects contradicted themselves. A stumble in memory became proof of deceit. In Salem, girls screamed in the courtroom claiming they saw the accused spirit tormenting them, and judges treated those invisible visions as evidence. In Europe, sleep deprivation was a tool. Keep someone awake long enough, and even truth unravels into confession. What you face now is the same script, centuries old. A quirky fringe fact: some interrogators believed witches couldn't say the Lord's Prayer without stumbling. They'd force the accused to recite it, and if the tongue tripped on a single word, that was enough. But nerves can make anyone stumble. Imagine being stared down by neighbours who want your downfall, and then being expected to pray perfectly. Even saints might falter. Yet in this game, faltering is guilt. The constable's voice drops lower. They say you've signed his book. The lantern flame wavers, like it knows the script too. You want to shout that you can't even sign your own name properly, that your letters crawl like drunken ants. But you've learned shouting only feeds their fire, so you sit in silence and your silence is treated as consent. The guard scratches notes onto the parchment, his quill hissing like a snake with every stroke. At some point, you lose track of what you've answered. Did you admit to missing church twice or 3 times? Did you deny the dreams firmly enough, or did your voice crack at the wrong word? The questions blur together, their echoes louder than your responses. Your mind feels split, half of you answering, half of you watching from the corner shaking her head. Scholars still argue about whether the accused actually began to believe their own guilt. Some suggest the combination of isolation, fear and constant questioning created false memories. People confessed not because they lied, but because their minds reshaped reality to survive. Others insist confessions were calculated, desperate bargains to avoid the rope. What's clear is that truth was never the goal. The process wasn't built to find innocence. It was built to manufacture guilt. The constable finally leans back, his eyes tired but triumphant. "Think on it," he says, as if mercy is tucked in the folds of his words. The guard gathers his notes, and together they leave, the lantern vanishing with them. Darkness rushes back, thicker than before. You sit on the dirt floor, your breath shaky, your thoughts looping like a cracked song. Sleep finally drags you under, but it isn't kind. You dream of a courtroom filled with faces, all of them pointing. You stand in the centre trying to speak, but every word turns into smoke before it leaves your mouth. The minister holds a book, not Bible, not Devil's Ledger, but a blank volume. He dips a quill, looks straight at you, and writes your name across every page. You wake with your own voice in your ears, whispering words you don't remember starting. For a moment you wonder if you did speak to something in the dark, then you realise it doesn't matter. In this place, doubt is already a confession. The next morning the guards wake you before the sun has properly risen. Their boots scrape against the dirt floor, and the rattle of your shackle being undone feels louder than thunder. You stand stiffly, every bone aching from straw and stone. They march you out through the chill air, past the square that still smells faintly of ashes from last night's cooking fires. This time they're not taking you to the pond or the minister's study. They're taking you to the meeting house, where judgment wears a wig of authority and a robe of piety. The door swings open, and the sound hits first. A buzz of voices, the scrape of benches, the cough of a nervous throat, then silence as every head turns toward you. The court isn't grand, just a wide room with wooden beams and a raised platform, but it feels taller than a cathedral. You're shoved into the centre, a stool beneath you once again, this time with no fire to soften the chill. The faces are all familiar. That's what makes it unbearable. It isn't strangers who will decide your fate, it's neighbours with folded hands and sharpened eyes. The magistrates sit at the front, stiff as carved figures. Quills wait in ink pots, ready to trap your words like flies in amber. Beside them the minister lingers, his presence as heavy as scripture itself. Witnesses are called. The baker's wife stands, her voice trembling but loud enough for all. She says you cursed her oven last winter, that her bread blackened no matter how carefully she watched it. The crowd murmurs. You remember clearly, it was her forgetting to stoke the fire. But in this room, memory bends to her need. Historically, witch trials often unfolded exactly like this. Ordinary grievances, accidents and illnesses were retold as deliberate harm. Courts accepted spectral evidence, claims that your spirit appeared in dreams or visions, as valid testimony. In Salem, this practice was central. Accusers collapsed into fits and screamed that they saw the accused tormenting them. Judges leaned forward, solemn as surgeons, and treated invisible phantoms as fact. Rational defence had no footing in such a courtroom. A quirky fringe fact, in some cases, animals were brought as witnesses. Cats, dogs, or pigs accused of being familiars could be executed alongside their supposed masters. One record even notes a chicken blamed for laying a malformed egg, presented in court as Satan's token. Imagine sitting on the trial while your neighbour's poultry testifies against you by simply existing in a lopsided shell. Now the constable takes the stand. He recounts your silence, your hesitation, your supposed unwillingness to answer simple questions. Each pause you made becomes an admission. Each crack in your voice becomes guilt. You want to shout that silence is not confession, that hesitation is not proof, but you know shouting will only tighten their net. The magistrate leans forward, his voice stern but calm. "The court has heard you bear unusual marks," he says. A rustle moves through the benches. You feel the phantom sting of the pin again, the matron's murmurs echoing in your skin. You shake your head, but already a clerk is writing. In ink, your denial looks indistinguishable from confession. Scholars still debate the psychology of these trials. Were magistrates genuinely convinced by this evidence, or were they playing to the fears of the crowd? Some argue the trials were theatre, performance of justice designed to maintain order in chaotic times. Others believe the judges themselves were swept up in the panic, caught between their own doubts and the pressure to act decisively. Whatever the truth, the outcome was the same: ordinary people trapped in extraordinary fear and no room left for reason. The next witness is called, a neighbour child no older than 10. She clutches her mother's hand, eyes wide. When prompted, she claims you pinched her in her dreams, that you appeared by her bed and whispered curses. She begins to shake, her small body writhing as if touched by invisible hands. The courtroom gasps. The minister calls for prayer. And you sit there, helpless, watching a child perform your guilt into existence. You want to stand, to shout that it isn't true, but the room is already convinced. The sight of a trembling child outweighs every word you might muster. You realise the cruel truth. They didn't bring you here to test innocence. They brought you here to confirm guilt they'd already agreed upon. The trial is not a question. It's a script, and you're the unwilling lead. When the child calms, the clerk notes her words with solemn care, as though she just delivered divine revelation. The magistrate thanks her gently and dismisses her, his tone warmer than anything he's used with you. You sit in silence, aware that no testimony in your defence will be asked, none will be believed. Your fate is being stitched in public, and the crowd nods along with every stitch. The session ends with no verdict yet, just more muttering, more scribbling, more promises of continued examination. You're led back to your cell, the sound of benches scraping behind you like 1,000 knives being sheathed. The air outside smells of bread baking, of wood smoke, of life continuing as if the trial were just another errand between chores. And in a way it is. You return to the damp straw and the silence, but this time it isn't the dark that presses hardest. It's the memory of the crowd's eyes, all of them people you knew, watching you shrink beneath their certainty. The court is not finished with you, and neither is their hunger. They calm, the constable explains with grim satisfaction. Then her spectre is upon them. The body recalls its own spirit. You almost want to laugh at the absurdity. Your real hand is supposed to cancel out your ghost hand, but you know better. No humour will survive in this room. They lead the first girl forward. She staggers as though invisible ropes yank her limbs. When she's close enough, the guard grabs your wrist and presses your palm against her sleeve. The girl collapses in a heap, gasping for breath, then blinking up with wide, watery eyes. The crowd murmurs. Proof. Not relief, not coincidence. Proof. You want to shout that her trembling eased because she was exhausted, because anyone forced to shriek long enough will crumple eventually. But your voice would sound like excuse, and excuse already rhymes with guilt. Another girl is brought forward. The ritual repeats. The touch. The collapse. The satisfied sigh of the crowd. Your skin burns where your hand grazes her shoulder, not because of any curse, but because you can feel your humanity draining piece by piece with each performance. You're no longer a person, but a prop in their theatre. Historically, these touch tests were widely used, especially in England and colonial America. The theory was that the witch's physical body anchored the wandering spectre. Touching the accused supposedly broke the spell, ending the victim's torments. Of course, it worked every time, because the afflicted knew to stop once the touch occurred, whether consciously or through the power of expectation. Scholars call it psychosomatic, villagers called it justice. A quirky fringe fact. In some records, victims were said to vomit pins, nails, or even bits of glass after being bewitched. The objects were shown in court as physical evidence. Today we'd call that sleight of hand or hysteria. But back then it was enough to convince juries that invisible forces had stuffed hardware into children's throats. No surprise that your touch calming a fainting girl feels damning to everyone present. The magistrate leans forward, his expression polished into sorrowful authority. Deny it if you will, he says, but the afflicted cannot lie. That line lands heavier than any rope. You look at the pale faces before you, neighbours, friends, people you've prayed beside, and realise the trap is perfect. Children's visions, fainting fits, a crowd's eager gasps, all weighted more heavily than your steady denial. Scholars still debate why courts clung to spectral evidence despite its fragility. Some say it was because spiritual fear outran rational thought. Others argue it served as a convenient weapon, allowing authorities to punish without needing proof that could be challenged. There's even debate about whether accusers believed their own visions or performed them knowingly. What is clear is that the line between reality and imagination blurred until the two became indistinguishable, especially in crowded rooms with everyone watching. The girls are helped back to their seats, pale and trembling but alive. The crowd exhales as one, their relief thick with righteousness. They've seen evil exposed and they don't need more than that. The magistrate closes his book with a heavy thud and announces that testimony will resume tomorrow. You're escorted out, wrists bound, eyes of the crowd carving into your back. Outside the air feels thin, starved of oxygen. You tilt your head and see the sky, wide and ordinary, the same blue it was yesterday before accusations became clouds. For a moment you wonder if the heavens know, if they're keeping tally of truth and falsehood somewhere higher than this meeting house ceiling. But you also know that when your story is told later, it won't matter whether the sky was clear or stormy. It will only matter that you floated, that a child trembled, that your hand stopped her fit. Those fragments will harden into history, whether or not they were ever true. You're led back to the stone cell, the straw, the dripping water, but the silence isn't silence anymore. It's filled with echoes of screams and gasps, of invisible birds and fainting children. You realise the court doesn't need iron or flame to break you. It only needs imagination, sharpened into law. The next day begins not with bells, but with the scratch of a quill. You hear it before you even see the clerk, his pen slicing over parchment in quick, decisive strokes. When the guards drag you back into the meeting house, you see him hunched at the table, already writing. Not waiting for your words, not waiting for testimony, just writing. As if history must be captured before it happens. The sound is relentless. Scratch, blot, scratch. Each stroke feels like another nail hammered into the coffin of your story. The magistrates are there too, straight-backed and sober, but it's the clerk who dominates the room for you. He never glances up, never acknowledges your presence. His hand moves like a machine, recording not only what is said, but what he thinks will be said, smoothing over contradictions before they're even spoken. You sit down and realise your fate is being inked in real time, whether or not your lips ever open. The first witness speaks, again the baker's wife, repeating her tale about the oven. Only now her story has grown. She swears she saw you smirking as the bread blackened, heard you mutter something in a tongue not your own. You know that memory didn't exist yesterday. The quill accepts it anyway, scratching dutifully. Once written, her invention becomes fact. Historically, clerks held enormous power during witch trials. Their records are often the only reason we know the details centuries later. But those details weren't neutral, they were filtered through the clerk's pen, sometimes trimmed, sometimes embroidered. In Salem, for example, Samuel Parris, the minister, served as a clerk and recorded testimony that framed the accused in the worst possible light. What survives for historians isn't truth. It's what one man decided to preserve. And once ink dried, it hardened into reality for generations. Here's a quirky fringe fact. Some clerks added their own flourishes, sketching little devilish symbols or marginal notes in the corners of trial records, not because they believed they'd seen them, but because embellishment made the story juicier. Imagine being condemned by someone doodling horns in the margins of your life. The testimony continues. A farmer claims you cursed his cow. A child claims she saw you in a dream, this time feeding that yellow bird perched on your shoulder. Each statement stacks higher than the last, and the quill captures all with equal certainty. You realise that truth doesn't matter anymore. What matters is ink. Your words fade when spoken. Their words endure in writing, and writing is what posterity believes. The magistrate finally turns to you. Do you wish to answer? He asks, as though it is generosity. You speak slowly, carefully. You explain about the bread, that it burned because the firewood was damp. You explain about the cow, that illness comes with the season. You explain about the child's dream, that dreams are nothing but shadows of the mind. Your voice shakes, but you speak anyway. For a moment, you feel the room listening. Then you hear it. Scratch. The clerk is writing. Not your words, at least not as you said them. He shortens, twists, compresses. Your careful explanations shrink to single phrases. She admitted the bread burned. She confessed the cow was ill. Each line trims away the defence and leaves only what feeds suspicion. You realise you are being edited into guilt. Scholars debate how much of this was deliberate bias, and how much was the natural distortion of hurried transcription. Was the clerk actively framing the accused, or was he simply capturing shorthand that later readers misinterpreted? Either way, the effect is the same. Nuance vanishes, and guilt expands to fill the gap. The accused were rarely remembered in their own words, only in the clerk's. Your frustration surges. You want to shout, to demand they let you write your own story, but of course you can't. You never learned letters well enough to record your own defence. That illiteracy, once just a fact of life, is now the blade at your throat. Your voice is air, theirs is ink, and ink will outlive air. The magistrate nods, satisfied. The witnesses are dismissed, and the session closes. The clerk shakes his wrist, flexing cramped fingers, then blots the page with sand. You watch as your life is pressed flat, smoothed, stacked among the other sheets. To him, you're not a person, you're paperwork. As the guards lead you back, the sound of the quill follows you like a phantom. Scratch, blot, scratch. You wonder if 100 years from now, someone will read the record and believe every stroke. You wonder if anyone will ever know the truth, or if you've already vanished into someone else's script. The thought chills you more than the stone cell waiting to swallow you again. Back in the cell, you sit with the damp straw and the echo of that quill still rattling in your skull. Scratch, blot, scratch. It plays on repeat as if the clerk is still there, inscribing your life away with the indifference of a man tallying grain. You try to convince yourself that words are just words, that ink can't actually kill you. But then you remember how they all leaned forward when the child screamed, how they gasped when your hand stilled her trembling. You know better. Ink has teeth. The door opens again hours later. A guard announces you'll be questioned privately this time. For your own good. You almost laugh. Nothing about this is for your good. They lead you to a small chamber lit by 2 candles and the pale light of dusk through a narrow slit. The magistrate is there, along with the minister. They sit across from you, their faces arranged in solemn sympathy. That's when you know the trap is about to spring tighter. The minister speaks first. His voice is low, gentle, almost kind. Confession, he says, is the first step toward salvation. He doesn't say mercy, not yet, but the word hovers unspoken in the air. The magistrate follows, explaining that those who confessed often spared themselves the rope. Instead, they lived, though perhaps not freely, serving God by naming others who walk the devil's path. You're offered a choice: lie to survive, or hold to truth and die. You want to cling to the idea that truth matters, that honesty is armour. But you've seen enough to know the opposite is true here. The truth is brittle, shattering in the hands of your neighbours. Lies, though, they are the soft clay they want to mould. And they're asking you to provide more. Not just your own guilt, but names. Names of others who might join you in this pit. That's the real coin they want. Historically, this was a standard tactic. Confession didn't always mean execution. In some cases, it spared the accused, at least temporarily. But the price of survival was high, naming others. In Salem, dozens of people confessed, hoping to save their lives, and in doing so they expanded the hunt, accusing friends, neighbours, even family. Some survived the noose, but they carried the weight of betrayal forever. Others delayed execution with confessions, only to be condemned later anyway when the tide turned. It was survival on borrowed time. Here's the quirky fringe fact. One English woman, when pressed to confess, claimed she had flown to a witch's sabbath on the back of her neighbour's cat. The court recorded the detail earnestly, the cat's name included, as if the absurdity didn't matter. What mattered was the confession itself. Once words were spoken, however fanciful, they were treated as truth. The stranger the story, the easier it fit their expectations. The minister leans closer, candlelight painting his face in gold and shadow. "You need not perish," he says softly. "You need only speak." His eyes glisten with what might be real conviction, or might be the satisfaction of a man proving his sermon true. The magistrate adds, "Those who repent may yet return to their families." You think of your children, small, wide-eyed, already hearing your name twisted into curses. Wouldn't it be better to live for them, even in shame, than to leave them alone under the shadow of your death? But another thought slices in. If you confess, if you name others, you'll be dragging them into the same fire. You'd become the very thing you're accused of, a woman destroying her neighbours with words. Maybe they'll die, maybe they'll confess and accuse in turn. Either way, you'll have poisoned the well even deeper. You wonder if you could ever live with that, even if the rope spares you. Scholars debate whether confessors believed their own stories. Some suggest that, under pressure, people began to half-believe, their memories reshaped by constant questioning and sleepless nights. Others argue it was purely pragmatic. They told whatever would keep their hearts beating. Either way, confessions spiraled into more accusations, feeding the machine until it was too big to stop. You sit in silence for a long moment, the candle flames swaying in the draught. The magistrate shifts impatiently. The minister folds his hands and bows his head, as though already praying for your soul. You realise they don't just want your words, they want your surrender. They want you to step willingly into the story they've written. That, more than the rope, is what terrifies you. At last you whisper, "I have nothing to confess." Your voice is steady, though your insides quake. The magistrate exhales sharply, as though you've wasted his evening. The minister shakes his head, disappointment radiating like cold rain. "Think on it," he says. "The devil loves stubbornness." Then they rise, gathering their papers and candles. leaving you in the growing dark. Back in your cell, the silence feels as heavier than ever. You know this reprieve is temporary. Tomorrow they'll ask again. Tomorrow the choice will still stand. Your life in exchange for lies, or truth in exchange for death. Tonight you hold to silence, but you wonder how long silence can survive the weight of fear. By mid-morning, they've decided your body is a notice board. A guard fastens a length of chain around your waist, more theatre than restraint, and clicks the lock with a flourish for the small knot of neighbours already pretending they just happen to be passing by. The constable announces, almost kindly, that you'll be walked through the market for an hour. He says it like he's offering fresh air. You hear it as the word it is, display. The square is alive with the ordinary. Barrels creak, hens complain from wicker cages, a boy chases a runaway turnip with heroic seriousness. The smell is a thick braid, hot bread, wet wool, smoked fish, tannin from the leather stall, plus you, pond cold and iron sour woven right into the morning. Heads tilt, people adjust their shawls, a few step back as if your shadow leaks. The town crier lifts his staff, rings a bell that rings your bones, and recites the charges in a voice trained to be memorable. Your name bounces off timber and stone and comes back sounding like a verdict. The chain tugs, you walk not too fast, dignity lives in pace now. Every storefront is a chapter you used to belong to. The baker, dusted with flour, folds his arms and looks through you at nothing. The cooper feigns a sudden fascination with his hoop. Mistress Webb, who once swore you had the best advice for calming colic, pulls her cloak closer and pretends to count onions. It's a pantomime of indifference so exaggerated it reads of fear. Historically, public shaming was woven into witch persecutions as neatly as rope into a gallows knot. In parts of Germany and Scotland, shame processions, Schandprozessionen, paraded the accused through town before judgment, sometimes with placards naming their supposed sins. In England and her colonies, pillories and joes, iron collars fastened to church walls, made bodies into sermons. Even when witchcraft wasn't explicitly the charge, the message was the same. Let the crowd learn obedience from a single neck. Authorities believed visibility disciplined both culprit and onlookers. Spectacle was policy. A pack of children drifts behind you like a tail, inventing songs as quickly as sparrows invent arguments. One girl, bolder than the rest, trots close enough to see the sore on your wrist where the rope burned at the pond. She inhales sharply and runs back to whisper. Now the sore is a sign, not a wound. That's how quickly the market alchemizes fact into flavour. You pass the herbalist's table, bundles of thyme and tansy, rosemary tied with red thread, and have a treacherous moment of wanting to step into your old life, to correct her knot, to ask after her mother's cough. You keep walking. Here's a quirky fringe fact to tuck in your pocket while you pass the oddities. People carried their own portable protections to markets like this. A hagstone, a pebble naturally pierced by a hole, hung on a ribbon in a pocket to keep witches from peering in. Rowan twigs braided with scarlet thread dangled from belts. Some even sold ready-made witch bottles. Clay flasks stuffed with urine, bent pins, and hair, meant to be buried under thresholds to reverse curses back on their senders. You can't help picturing your neighbours trading coins for a jar of someone else's fear like it's a spice. A man hawks iron charms, horse brasses stamped with suns and stars, hammered nails he swears were blessed by a blacksmith who never missed Sunday service. Another sells pins extra long and keen, the kind that make you think of prickers who travel town to town proving innocence by failing to draw blood. You wonder if his best customers are the same people who whisper that you floated. A woman across the way arranges glass beads in a bowl. They catch light like captured midges. If you squint, they look like tears for sale. Near the well, the minister appears as if conjured, offering you a glance that is somehow both pity and prosecution. He murmurs to a knot of men, and one of them nods toward you like you're a weather sign. You think of yesterday's negotiation in the candlelit room, the price of confession measured in other people's names, and your mouth tastes of iron again. The chain tugs you onward. Scholars still debate what exactly public processions like this accomplished, beyond simple cruelty. Were they meant as deterrence, see this body, avoid this fate, or as ritual purification, a community dumping its anxiety into one vessel to feel clean again? Some argue the market day timing was calculated, ensuring maximum audience and therefore maximum social glue. Others think it was logistics, a crowd that existed anyway. And beneath those lines of inquiry runs the question of power. Was this about saving souls? Or about reminding every eye in the square who holds the bell, the book, and the rope? Someone throws a clump of mud that doesn't quite reach. It lands with a slap at your feet and spreads like a small, embarrassed pond. Laughter skitters around the edges of the square, nervous as mice. A boy steps forward with a stale crust, uncertain. The guard swats his hand down, not because he won't allow kindness, you suspect, but because kindness blurs the outline they need you to have. Better to keep the monster crisp. You stop at the market cross, exactly where people meet to bargain, while the crier reads your charges again. The irony is too on the nose to be funny. You're a commodity today, appraised by glances, traded for calm. You're stocked like any other stall, only your product is certainty. We are good because she is bad. You can feel the purchase happening in their shoulders, the way a convenient morality fills them like warm broth. If you were selling literal wares, you'd call it a brisk morning. A historical aside, you can almost hear the clerk turning into neat lines later. In some towns, the accused were made to wear pointy caps or signs marked witch, visual amplifiers to make the moral clearer at a distance. There were even cases of metal masks, ranks or scold's bridles, forced over mouths, spikes pressing tongues, a contraption designed less to punish witches than to silence women the town found inconvenient. The categories bled together in practice. Once a body is a platform, the message can be swapped at will. Another fringe note, you notice chalk marks at shop thresholds, little stars, crossed lines, apotropaic doodles meant to snarl evil like burrs catch wool. Some are new, the dust hasn't had time to soften them. Someone stayed up late drawing protection into their doorstep, perhaps after watching you bob in the pond, perhaps after hearing that yellow bird flit through the courtroom air. Fear is a craftsman. It always finds something to make. You are turned slowly like a spit, displayed to each side of the square in turn. You study faces because looking at the ground feels like an admission. There's the miller's wife, jaw set, the schoolmaster calculating. The girl who once fell asleep on your shoulder during a long sermon, now hiding behind her mother's skirt. A man you don't know at all lifts 2 fingers to his brow. Habit or blessing, you can't tell. That small, ambiguous gesture saves your breath for a moment. The hour stretches and thins, a ribbon pulled through a ring. Your feet ache. Your shoulders ache. Your face aches from the work of staying neutral while people compose a future where you're no longer part of their errands. You think of the clerk's quill, already shaped and sharpening this into a paragraph, displayed for edification of the people. He won't record the boy and his crust, the almost kindness that shattered under a guard's hand. He won't note the way a woman's mouth quivered before she straightened it into judgment. He'll keep it tidy. The market is not tidy. When at last the bell rings again, the crier lowers his staff and nods. The guard loosens the chain, though not enough for you to forget it. As they turn you toward the lane back to the jail, the square exhales. People return to buying eels and measuring wool and arguing about the weather, relieved to resume the simpler arithmetic of coins. Behind you, the market keeps beating like a heart that never noticed you were there. In front of you, the lane narrows back to stone and shadow. You walk because walking is what's left. You catalogue the tiny rebellions you still own, the pace you keep, the way you square your shoulders, the way you refuse to let your shame be entertaining. A scrap of straw clings to your hem like a ridiculous medal. You leave it there. Let them read what they want from it. They've been doing that all along. That night, as the guards shove you back into your corner of straw, you hear the creak of wood outside, hammer on beam, rope drawn, taut, the unmistakable rhythm of construction. You don't need to be told what they're building. The sound carries too much history, too much certainty. Gallows don't arrive in silence. They announce themselves with every strike, reminding everyone that justice, or at least someone's version of it, has a schedule to keep. You lie still, listening to the knocks echo across the square. Each strike feels like it lands inside your ribs. You imagine the scaffold rising plank by plank, a skeletal stage against the dawn. It's being built in plain view, not hidden away. That's part of the lesson. The gallows is never just for the accused, it's for the audience. Every villager will walk past those beams and think, better her than me. Historically, the building of gallows was itself a public ritual. In England and New England alike, they were often erected where everyone could see, sometimes near marketplaces, sometimes beside meeting houses. Not only did it warn the living, it also offered an unspoken reassurance. The law was tangible, built from wood and rope, something you could touch. In Salem, the hangings took place on Gallows Hill, visible from surrounding fields. Farmers ploughing could look up and see justice dangling. It was horror as landscape. Here's a quirky fringe fact. In some places, hangmen were required to practice beforehand, testing knots and weights with sacks of grain or dead animals. If the rope broke during the actual execution, it was seen as a sign, sometimes divine, sometimes diabolical, that the condemned was innocent. There are records of ropes snapping mid-drop, sending the crowd into chaos, while judges scrambled to decide if the trial had been flawed. Even the gallows could misbehave. The next morning confirms what your ears already knew. The square hums with unusual energy, a gathering more like a festival than a punishment. You catch glimpses through the narrow slit of your cell. People leaning against fences, children perched onto your shoulders, peddlers setting up early with baskets of apples and small jugs of cider. Executions draw crowds the way harvest feasts do. Some come for the lesson, others for the spectacle, many for both. You realise with a sick twist that your death will be treated like entertainment, a grim holiday before the winter sets in. A guard enters, his face stiff, his voice brisk. "You'll see it before long," he mutters, not meeting your eye. For a flicker of a moment, you see unease in his jaw. Maybe he's never escorted a neighbour to a scaffold before. Maybe he's still trying to convince himself this is duty, not murder. That's the thing about witch hunts. They don't just consume the accused. They gnaw at everyone, forcing them to reconcile their fear with their conscience. Scholars argue whether these executions were truly about justice or about performance. Some see them as morality plays. The community purging its fear by staging a visible, irreversible act. Others frame them as tools of control, reinforcing the authority of ministers and magistrates in a world where disease and famine constantly undermined their power. The gallows stood not just for punishment, but for reassurance. The law is stronger than chaos, but when you're the one listening to the hammer thud, that reassurance tastes like ashes. The noise outside grows louder as workers hoist the beam into place. You picture it standing tall, rope swaying gently like a pendulum. You wonder if the carpenter building it thinks about who will swing from it, or if he tells himself it's just another job. Wood is wood, wages are wages. Maybe he hums a tune while he planes the edges, the way you once hummed while kneading bread. Your bread collapsed, his beam stands. Both become evidence of something larger than they deserve. Another quirky detail, in some European towns, gallows were permanent structures, left standing year after year, weathering like monuments. Birds nested on them, children grew up with their silhouettes on the horizon. Justice wasn't just an event, it was architecture. In New England, gallows were sometimes torn down after executions, only to be rebuilt when needed. But in either case, the message was clear. The scaffold belonged to the town as much as the church or the well. As dusk falls, the sound of hammering finally ceases. Silence rolls across the square, heavy and expectant, like the pause before thunder. You lie awake, staring at the stone ceiling, imagining the gallows outside bathed in moonlight, its ropes swaying as if eager for morning. You think of how it will smell of fresh wood, how the rope will creak when stretched, how the crowd will murmur. You try to tell yourself not to imagine, but imagination is all they've left you. The gallows is waiting. You can feel it breathing through the walls. You wake to the shuffle of boots and the low rumble of voices outside your cell. It takes a moment for your mind to catch up. Daylight seeping through the slit, the air already buzzing. You brace yourself for chains and a march toward the scaffold, but instead, a different rumour slides through the cracks. You hear it whispered between guards, carried on the marketplace air like a secret too hot to keep. Some accused witches have been spared. Not forgiven, not cleared, but spared. So long as they name others. The words hang in your chest like smoke. Spared. It means no rope, at least not today, but the price is betrayal. You picture yourself standing before the magistrate, lips trembling, pointing to a neighbour's door. You imagine the way the crowd would shift, hungry for fresh names of the way dogs lunge for scraps. And then you imagine your neighbour's face, shocked, hollow, as she's dragged through the same dirt you walked last week. The thought makes your stomach knot. Historically, this was the cruel arithmetic of witch hunts. Confess, and you might be spared execution, though often you still lost property, reputation, freedom. More importantly, you're expected to expand the circle. Confessors in Salem accused dozens more, stretching the web until it entangled nearly 200 people. In Germany and Scotland, the pattern was the same. Confessions cascaded into fresh arrests, each new name feeding the fire. Communities devoured themselves one accusation at a time. Survival was measured in how many neighbours you were willing to sacrifice. Here's a quirky fringe fact. In some places, accused witches were believed to gather at secret feasts where the devil carved roasted oxen and served black bread that never ran out. Confessors described these Sabbaths in lurid detail, sometimes naming their own neighbours as banquet guests. Courts recorded the stories as fact, never mind that they sounded more like drunken dreams than testimony. A confession, however absurd, carried weight. The devil's menu became evidence enough to hang a farmer's wife. You sit in the straw, the idea gnawing at you. Could you do it? Could you speak a name, any name, and step away from the noose? Part of you whispers yes. You think of your children, their faces pale in your memory. You imagine them growing up without you, carrying the brand of your guilt. If naming someone else could keep you alive, even briefly, wouldn't that be mercy for them? But then you remember the friend who lowered her eyes in the square, the woman who once pressed berries into your palm, the child who clutched her mother's skirt when you passed. You wonder if they have already spoken your name in some dark room, trading your life for their own. The thought stings worse than the rope ever could. To repeat that cycle, to push the blade into another's back, would be to become part of the machinery that's grinding you down. Scholars debate whether those who named names were villains or victims. Some argue it was sheer survival instinct. Cornered, terrified, they reached for the only escape offered. Others see it as complicity, ordinary people weaponizing the hunt to settle old feuds. Most likely it was both. Fear mixed with grudges, mercy tangled with malice. What's undeniable is that the strategy worked, at least temporarily. The living testified against the soon-to-be dead, and the chain lengthened. A guard pokes his head into your cell. "They'll ask again today," he mutters. His eyes avoid yours, but the message is clear. You're being handed a lifeline, frayed, poisoned, but a lifeline nonetheless. He shuts the door before you can answer. The silence returns, thicker than before. You try to weigh your choices, but the scales are rigged. Speak and you damn another. Stay silent and you damn yourself. Either way, the rope waits. You close your eyes and imagine standing in court, your voice breaking as you name a neighbour. You imagine the clerk's quill scratching with renewed vigour, ink soaking into parchment like blood. You imagine the crowd leaning forward, relief washing over them because now the monster has multiplied, and the hunt can go on. You imagine yourself walking away alive but smaller, hollow, gnawed from the inside out. Survival, but at what cost? The rumours swirl louder as the day drags on. You hear names carried through the square, names of people you know. Some who were spared yesterday are now witnesses today, their testimonies pointing like daggers toward others. The web stretches wider. You're not the only one caught in its threads. For a moment, you feel an almost bitter relief. At least you're not alone in your torment. But then the guilt comes, because thinking that way makes you part of the same machine. By nightfall, the decision is no closer. You sit with your back against the damp wall, tracing cracks in the stone, and realise the truth. There is no clean path. There is only the illusion of choice designed to keep the hunt alive. Whether you speak or stay silent, the fire will spread. The only question is whether you'll add fuel to it or let yourself be consumed first. Night drains into morning without giving you rest. When the guards arrive, you're not surprised. They don't bind you as tightly as before. Perhaps they think you've softened, that the rumours of mercy have cracked your resolve. They lead you through narrow streets still damp with dew. The town feels quieter than usual, but you sense the eyes behind shutters. Curtains stir, hinges creak, as though every house wants to watch you pass. You feel the weight of families gathered inside, whispering about what your fate will mean for theirs. The meeting house door groans open, and the air inside is thick, already soured with breath and candle smoke. You're not placed in the centre this time, but set to the side, almost like scenery. At first you don't understand why, till you realise who they've brought forward instead. It's your family. Your chest tightens when you see them, your children pressed close together, your eldest trying to look braver than she feels, your youngest clutching the sleeve of a neighbour who's escorted them here. Their faces are pale but alive, eyes wide and darting, unsure whether to reach for you or recoil. You extend a hand, instinct stronger than fear, but the guard steps between, a reminder that even motherhood can be dangerous here. The magistrate begins his solemn speech about the dangers of corruption spreading even into the innocent household. He asks questions not of you, but of them. Have you seen your mother speak to animals? Did she whisper over bread, over milk, over your sickbed? Each question is sugar-dipped, meant to sound like care for their safety. You watch your children glance at one another, torn between loyalty and survival. Your throat aches more than any rope could. Historically, families were not spared from the machinery of accusation. Children testified against parents, husbands against wives, siblings against each other. In Salem, the daughter of Sarah Good accused her own mother. In Europe, frightened sons and daughters parroted what interrogators fed them, their testimonies carrying just as much weight as any adults. The hunt dissolved the family bond until loyalty to God, or at least to authority, outweighed blood. A quirky fringe fact: in one German case, a child accused his mother of flying through the chimney on a pitchfork. The court recorded the claim with perfect seriousness, and the woman was executed. Later, when the child was asked again, he said he only repeated what others suggested. Too late. The record had already swallowed her life. Children's words, innocent or manipulated, could swing the blade. The magistrate waits, and the silence thickens. Your eldest finally shakes her head, voice trembling. She prayed over us, like all mothers do here. Relief floods you, so sharp it almost drops you to your knees, but the magistrate's brow furrows, as if her denial is itself suspicious. He notes something to the clerk, who scratches steadily at his page. Even defence is twisted into evidence. The minister steps forward, speaking directly to your children now. The devil tempts through those we love most. Do not fear, speaking truth. His tone is gentle, fatherly, the kind of voice children are taught to obey. Your youngest begins to cry, her little body shaking. The neighbour pats her shoulder, whispering something you can't hear. You want to rush forward to scoop her up, but you're rooted by chains and the gaze of the room. Scholars debate the psychology of these moments. Did children truly believe what they said, their memories reshaped by suggestion and fear? Or were they simply performing what adults expected, desperate to save themselves from punishment? Some historians argue that the pressure was so great that truth itself became flexible. Children convinced themselves they saw things they hadn't. Others insist they were pawns, coached into stories that fit the narrative. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. Parents left broken, children scarred. At last, the magistrate waves his hand, dismissing them. Your children are ushered out, glancing back only once. Their eyes cling to yours, and you manage a small nod, a silent promise that you are still theirs, no matter what the town writes about you. The door closes, and the emptiness they leave behind is almost unbearable. The magistrate clears his throat. Even her family cannot fully absolve her, he declares, though no such words were spoken. The clerk records it faithfully, turning absence into admission. You sit there, trembling, realizing that your children's loyalty may have brought them danger instead of safety. By defending you, they've drawn suspicion closer to themselves. The thought carves deeper than the gallows shadow ever could. Back in your cell, you replay every glance, every tear. You picture your children walking home under the stares of neighbours, whispers swirling around them like smoke. You imagine them growing up with your trial clinging to their names, always introduced as the children of the accused. You want to believe that truth will one day clear them, but you've seen too much to trust in that kind of mercy. The stone wall presses cool against your cheek as you close your eyes. For the first time, death feels less frightening than life. Not for yourself, but for what your survival might cost those you love most. That evening, when the guards leave you with a hunk of stale bread and a tin cup of water, you notice movement in the shadows of the cell. Not vermin this time, another body. They've put someone else in with you. For hours you'd been alone with your dripping ceiling and the echo of your thoughts, and suddenly there's a figure curled against the opposite wall, knees pulled tight to her chest. She's younger than you, though her face looks older from fear. Her hair is matted, her dress torn at the hem, as if she was dragged here in haste. For a while she says nothing. The silence stretches between you thick with suspicion, because in a world where words are weapons, even speaking to each other feels dangerous. But finally, in a cracked whisper, she says, "They came for me at dawn, said my cow's stillbirth was my doing." Your heart twists because it's so absurdly familiar. A sick animal, a failed loaf of bread, A child's nightmare, ordinary life, inflated into accusation. You nod slowly, a kind of communion. She relaxes just enough to uncurl, her eyes glistening in the dim light. Historically, prisons often housed multiple accused witches together. The jails were crowded, dank and unhealthy, but they were also spaces where people shared their fear, their anger, and sometimes their courage. In Salem, several women imprisoned together prayed, sang psalms, and even braided each other's hair. Some scholars argue that these shared moments of humanity offered a rare form of resistance, a refusal to let the hunt strip them entirely of dignity. Your new cellmate begins to talk more, her words tumbling in broken whispers. She tells you about the neighbour who accused her, a man who owed her family money. She swears the accusation was just his way of clearing his debt. She tells you how her own sister turned away at the square, eyes cold with self-preservation. You hear your own story reflected in hers, like a mirror cracked but still recognisable. Here's a quirky fringe fact. In some towns, prisoners accused of witchcraft smuggled charms or written prayers into their cells, scratched onto bits of paper or cloth. They weren't spells, but talismans of hope, scraps of scripture folded under straw, sometimes sewn into hems. In Germany, one woman embroidered the Lord's Prayer into her apron hem with her own hair. The jailers often confiscated these tokens, convinced they were tools of sorcery, when really they were desperate anchors against despair. The two of you share your bread, passing the stale lump between you like it's a feast. Hunger softens the crust, and silence softens the fear. For the first time in days, you feel the tiniest ember of something that might be called comfort. She asks if you think God sees what's happening. You answer honestly, you don't know. Some nights you think his silence is abandonment. Other nights you think it's sorrow. She nods, as though that ambiguity is still better than despair. Scholars debate whether solidarity among the accused changed outcomes. Some argue that shared strength allowed prisoners to resist false confessions, bolstering each other against the relentless questioning. Others believe it made them more vulnerable. Interrogators often played them against one another, twisting shared stories into contradictions. Either way, the records show glimpses of community, even in the darkest corners. People sang, people prayed, people whispered last words into each other's ears. Humanity clung to the walls as stubbornly as mould. As the night deepens, you and your cellmates speak of home. You describe your children, their laughter, before it soured into fear. She describes her cow, the one she swears was simply too old to carve again. You laugh once, quiet, almost ashamed, at the idea that livestock could damn a woman. The laugh feels strange in your throat, rusty from disuse, but it reminds you that your voice isn't gone yet. Later, you lie back on the straw, shoulder to shoulder, though you barely know each other. The cell doesn't feel wider, but it feels less suffocating. The silence now has two breaths in it, weaving together into a rhythm steadier than your own. Before you drift into uneasy sleep, you realise this small companionship is itself a form of defiance. They wanted you isolated, stripped of trust. But here you are, sharing bread, sharing whispers, keeping each other human in a place designed to erase that. Tomorrow the questions will return, the rope will still sway in the square. But tonight at least you are not entirely alone. The next morning, the guard opens the cell with a grunt and points not at you but at your cellmate. She stiffens like a deer caught in sudden light. They haul her to her feet, muttering that the witchfinder himself wants words with her. You watch as she's pulled away, her sleeve brushing yours in a fleeting farewell. Then the door slams, and you're alone again, left with the echo of her frightened breath. Hours crawl past, marked only by the scuff of boots overhead. You hear raised voices in the meeting house, then the heavy silence that follows. When she's finally returned, her face is pale, lips trembling, but her eyes burn with a strange mixture of fear and fury. She sinks to the straw beside you and whispers, "He smiled the whole time. The witchfinder." You'd heard the name murmured before, usually with awe and unease. He's not from your village. Men like him rarely are. They arrive with polished boots and heavier purses, carrying authority like a travelling show. He's a professional hunter of witches, which is both ridiculous and terrifying. Ridiculous because how does one take up such a profession? Terrifying because communities pay him to prove guilt, not innocence. Historically, witchfinders like Matthew Hopkins in England made careers out of persecution. Hopkins styled himself Witchfinder General in the 1640s, earning fees from towns desperate to cleanse themselves. He and his associates conducted searches, pricked marks, deprived suspects of sleep, and extracted confessions under conditions designed to break even the strongest. His short but devastating career may have led to more executions in 3 years than the English courts had seen in the previous half-century. Witch-finding was less about justice than about ambition, and ambition rarely stops at one victim. Your cellmate recounts her interrogation. He asked about familiars, about Sabbaths, about the Devil's Book, but what struck her most was the way he seemed pleased, as though every answer, whether denial or silence, was proof in his eyes. He said my hesitation meant I was hiding. He said my quick answers meant I was rehearsed. Her hands tremble as she describes how he leaned close, smiling as though her terror was validation. Here's a quirky fringe fact. Some witchfinders claim to carry a special book of their own, a ledger listing every witch they'd unmasked. It was as much a prop as a record, meant to impress communities with the scale of their success. Hopkins supposedly travelled with a staff of assistants, prickers, and even musicians to keep villagers entertained between examinations. Witch hunting wasn't just justice, it was business, sometimes bordering on theatre. By late afternoon, the guard comes again. This time it's your turn. They march you to the chamber where the witchfinder waits. He's younger than you expected, his cloak neatly pressed, his boots spotless despite the mud outside. His eyes are bright, quick, and calculating, like a man perpetually tallying debts. When he greets you, it's with the warmth of a host welcoming a guest, polished, courteous, rehearsed. Somehow that's worse than cruelty. He begins not with accusations, but with compliments. He remarks on your endurance, on how strong you've been through the tests. He frames it as admiration, but you hear the blade beneath the velvet. You are clever, he says, too clever to believe silence will save you. His quill hovers, ready to record whatever corner you stumble into. He asks about the pond. Did you feel the water reject you? Did you sense Satan's arms lifting you? You explain buoyancy, though you don't use the word. Only that air and clothing made you float. He smiles like a teacher hearing a child recite the wrong answer. Even your excuses are unnatural, he replies. Scratch. The quill records it. He shifts to the Devil's Book. He paints vivid scenes of moonlit meetings, of torches in the woods, of neighbours gathered in shadow. He describes the ink glistening on the page, the devil's hand guiding yours. His words are so detailed they almost sound like memory. You realise he doesn't need you to confess. He's already written the story. He just wants you to sign your name to it. Scholars debate whether witchfinders believed their own rhetoric. Some argue they were true zealots, convinced of their divine mission. Others see them as opportunists, exploiting fear for profit and prestige. Perhaps it was both. Belief fueling ambition. Ambition justifying belief. Whatever his motives, you know his success depends on your downfall. An innocent suspect means no fee, no fame. Guilt is the only currency he trades in. When you deny him, his smile sharpens. He speaks of mercy, of how others have confessed and been spared the rope. He dangles the possibility before you like a sweet. Then he lowers his voice and warns that stubbornness is the devil's fingerprint. You realise he's boxed you in again. Confess, and you live in shame. Deny, and you prove his point. At last, he waves the guard away. She will break, he says casually, as if predicting the weather. The dismissal wounds more than the questions. You're not a person to him, just a puzzle piece to be slotted into his growing ledger. Back in your cell, your cellmate squeezes your hand with trembling fingers. Neither of you speaks for a long time. Outside, the evening bells toll, announcing prayer. Inside, you feel only the echo of his smile and the knowledge that tomorrow he will return. Dawn doesn't so much arrive as it leaks. A pale thread sliding under the door, pooling in the hollows of the straw. You're awake before it, lying on your side, counting the damp heartbeats of the ceiling. Your cellmate's breath rasps softly behind you, a small saw cutting through a small log. Somewhere farther down the corridor a man coughs the kind of cough that counts years. Across stone and iron, the jail is tuning itself, drip, scrape, sigh, the soundtrack of being kept. You're not prepared for the other sound when it comes. It starts like a mistake, 2 notes from a throat too tired to aim, a hum, almost nothing, then a third note tests the air like a toe to cold water. Your cellmate stirs. You prop yourself on an elbow. There's a pause and then the notes return, holding hands this time. You recognise the shape before your mind catches the name. It's a psalm. It's De Profundis, the out of the depths one people sing when they've run out of clever things to say to God. You laugh barely, a tick of air. Out of the depths? Yep. Accurate branding, the tune drifts along the corridor, and the walls do their trick, bending sound so you can't tell who started. Another voice slides in from the right, careful, like joining a line of geese. By the time the melody reaches your door, it's plural. You feel the tremor of it in the floor, in the chain at your ankle, in your own mouth as it reaches for the pitch without permission. Your cellmate nudges you with a bony shoulder. "Go on," she whispers. "It's not about faith. It's about not letting silence have the last word." You open your mouth and find the note. Your voice is rusted, but it still moves. 4 voices become 6. 6 become 9. One wavers off, coughs, returns. The song is not pretty exactly. It's the kind of singing that leaves splinters. A wooden sound, raw and honest, shaped by hunger and bad air. But it threads you together. The corridor breathes in time. The guards do not bark. Maybe they think this is good for the optics, a little piety before the theatrics of justice. Maybe they just don't want to be the men who silence a prayer. Historically, jails filled with the accused were not always silent. In Salem, some prisoners kept up the habit of psalm singing, even sharing scraps of verses and prayers through cracks and keyholes. There are accounts from Scotland of condemned women singing the Old Hundredth on the walk to the stake or the noose, the tune braided to their names in the memory of witnesses. In German lands, night watchmen reported hearing whole wards take up a hymn, the sound travelling up stairwells like smoke. The human voice insisted on being a human voice, even where paper had turned people into ink. Your cellmate knows another psalm by heart, one about walking in shadows and fearing no evil. You nearly flinch at the irony, but you cling to the second half, the part that promises a table in the presence of enemies. A table sounds comically luxurious in a place where bread is a rock and water is a rumour, but the image does its job. A table implies choice, plates, a chair you can leave whenever you like. Your throat warms, the notes climb. Here's the quirky fringe fact that would make the clerk sniff. Scratched into the stones of a handful of old prisons, archaeologists have found protective doodles, apotropaic marks, little pentangles, flower-like wheels, and sometimes the sator square, that weird Latin palindrome, sator arepo tenet opera rotas. People carved as a catch-all shield. Prisoners and guards both etched them, lines against whatever prowled. There are even relics of braided cords, later called witches' ladders, tucked in rafters and under floorboards, knots used to count prayers or secretly anchor hopes. Not curses, just the looms people make from fear. The hymn swells, then steadying breaths pull it back into a thread. You close your eyes and picture the gallows in the square, its new wood pale as a bone. You picture the witchfinder's neat boots, the clerk's black quill, the minister's careful sigh. It would be easy to let the song sour into rage. It doesn't. Something about singing refuses to be only anger. Even when the words are about depths and shadows, the melody lifts the corners and says, "Look, we can still make a shape together." Your cellmate leans into you shoulder to shoulder, like last night. You hear her slip from singing to prayer, syllables tumbling, not elegant but sincere. You don't bother parsing them. Meaning is smuggled in tone more than text. The woman 3 cells down, her voice sharp as an apple peel, takes over the melody, and both of you follow. For a moment, you are a choir stitched from alleys, fields, kitchens, a mishmash of pitches and accents. A reminder that the town has not successfully simplified you into a single monstrous noun. Scholars argue about what this kind of sound does. Some say communal singing in captivity worked as resistance, a way of rehumanizing the accused and forcing listeners, the guards, the townsfolk outside, to confront the personhood beneath the label. Others suggest it was more ambiguous, an act that also rehearsed submission, the accused braiding themselves back into the very order that sought to erase them. There's a third camp that hears something else entirely, not politics but survival. When bodies are reduced to evidence, voices can keep a soul from dissolving. The debate, like most debates, wouldn't save anyone in your corridor. But if the song steadies one hand, slows one panicked breath, that's a kind of outcome too. Between verses, a guard's keys jingle, a small metallic bird hopping closer. You brace for a barked order. Instead, a different voice, his, sings one line in a low, embarrassed baritone before he catches himself and goes silent. Your cellmate's eyebrows climb. You file the moment alongside the boy at the market with the stale crust and the woman whose mouth trembled before she straightened it into judgment. Fractures in the mask. Hairline cracks where light exists. The melody changes without a vote. adrift into a cradle song you haven't heard since childhood. You don't remember all the words, your mother's version was patched together from 3 different villages, but your mouth furnishes vowels anyway. The tune is foolishly gentle for a place with iron rings in the walls. That's maybe why it works. You picture all the children nudged into accusing postures, all the mothers trying to sleep with that picture stuck behind their eyelids. You let the lullaby hold them for a minute, even if they'd never accept the gift. Breath by breath, the song loosens its grip and voices fall away. The man's cough returns to mark the quiet. The corridor compresses again into dripping and straw and stone. You lick your cracked lip and taste salt where the singing shook something loose. Your cellmate leans her head on your shoulder like you've agreed on it. You have, in a way, without words. You think of the clerk, the way his quill turned your defence into daggers. You imagine him trying to record this, prisoners indulged in seditious hymn, and deciding instead to leave it out because music complicates a tidy condemnation. Or maybe he'd note it as proof of false piety. Either way, you saw what he cannot. For a few minutes, grief and defiance shared a throat. You also think of your children. You imagine the tune slipping through the slit, riding the early light across rooftops, down a lane, through a half-shut shutter into their ears. Impossible, yes, but take it anyway. Let the song be bigger than brick. When the footsteps finally come for you, of course they do. This is a reprieve, not a rescue. You stand more easily than you expected. The floor feels less like a trapdoor, more like something you can use. Your cellmate squeezes your hand. "Sing it in your head," she says, practical as sweeping. You nod. You can't carry much out of here. You can carry that. As the door opens, a draught slips by, cool and not unkind. The day beyond it still holds a gallows, a witchfinder with a ledger smile, a minister with practiced sorrow, a crowd ready to take in their morning story. Also, though, a corridor that remembers being a choir. You allow yourself one small smile, nothing the magistrate can label, and step forward. The rhythm tucked in your chest like a contraband coin. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it betrays you. A blade of light slips under the door and climbs the wall like a thief, and with it comes the shadow of the rope outside, thin, wavering, unmistakable. Sunlight used to mean thawed paths and warm bread. Today it's just a spotlight, a stagehand pulling the curtain. The guards are almost gentle when they come. That's how you know it's the day. Brutality is for routine. Ceremony gets politeness. They let you wash your face at a bucket, which feels hilariously formal, like putting a ribbon on a wolf. Your hands are stiff, your lips cracked, but your mouth remembers the taste of tin. Your cellmate squeezes your wrist once. A knot tied without string. You tuck the song from dawn into your chest and keep it there. Contraband hope. Then the door opens wider than it has in weeks, and the corridor offers itself like a throat. Outside, the square has already organised into an audience. There's the murmur of market day without the bargaining, a hum tuned to anticipation. You take in the gallows with a single glance and then look away because giving it your attention feels like feeding it. Fresh wood, a crossbeam like a lifted arm. The rope, blonde and new, sways slightly as if impatient. A ladder leans there too. No trapdoor, not here. A cart waits, wheels braced. In this place they still do it the older way. You ascend, rope settles, cart pulls, and the world steps out from under you. Historically that's the picture. In England and New England in the late 17th century, hanging for witchcraft meant short drop and strangulation, not the later long drop designed to snap the neck. In Salem the accused were hanged, not burned, with the cart method on the rocky rise people later called a hill. Bodies were cut down and hastily buried near the site. Families sometimes snuck back by night to take them home. One man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death with stones for refusing to plead at all. The trials had range, let's put it that way. You're guided to the cart. The boards are rough beneath your shoes, splinters prying at the leather as if they want souvenirs. The witchfinder stands nearby, looking like a satisfied bookkeeper, boots still spotless. The minister folds his hands. The clerk, of course, is writing, because there must be minutes for even this. You and the quill are finishing together. The crowd parts around you like water around a rock. You glimpse a few faces you've catalogued. The baker's flowery jaw, the boy with the stale crust, a guard who accidentally sang one line at dawn and now won't meet your eyes. A woman elbows forward with a child on her hip. The little one stares, unblinking, and then buries her face in her mother's shoulder like someone peeking at thunder. You want to tell her it's only wooden rope and too many frightened adults, but that would be a lie. It's not only anything, Fear plus beyond wood equals theatre with consequences. The minister asks if you have last words. The phrase falls as like an invitation to edit a playbill after the actors have bowed. You consider being clever, something sharp that would lodge in their throats, but clever is wasted here. You think of your children, you think of your cellmate's cow, you think of the pond, the pin, the way sunlight makes a noose look almost innocent. Your mouth surprises you by choosing simple. You speak your children's names, you ask the crowd to let them grow up in peace, and you say one psalm line you half believe today. The clerk writes briskly and will later condense it to "she prayed," which is an impressive amount of erasure for a single verb. The witchfinder steps in, voice smooth as butter on cold bread. If you confess now, God may yet show you mercy. There it is, his favourite negotiation, the one that multiplies suspects. You hear the crowd lean toward the possibility the way ears lean toward gossip on a windy day. You shake your head. It is not bravado, it's exhausted accuracy. You have nothing left that would satisfy him except other people's names, and you won't release those birds from their cages. Here's a quirky fringe fact for this lovely occasion. People sometimes collected pieces of gallows rope as charms. A scrap of the noose was thought to cure headaches, prevent toothaches, or bring luck in cards and lotteries. Chips from the scaffold could be pocketed as protective tokens, and the touch of a hanged man's hand, grimly enough, was believed in parts of Europe to heal skin ailments and swellings. Imagine leaving this world and becoming someone's lucky string. Even your end is repurposed. The executioner, not the witchfinder, that would be gauche, measures the rope with his eyes. He is all practicalities, the craftsman of endings. He sets the knot a little to the left. The hemp smells like rain and barns, a countryside scent made treacherous by context. He murmurs to you, not unkindly, breathe deep. It's good advice for everything except the next minute. A historical aside, the minister would not appreciate you thinking, pregnant women sometimes pleaded the belly, and won reprieve until after birth. Life inside trumping law outside. Records show juries of matrons inspecting bodies to confirm it. That mercy had its limits, of course. Delay isn't pardon, and there are debates about how often it truly saved lives versus extended terror. Mercy, like sunlight, can be a two-faced visitor. The rope settles, the ladder waits. You're aware, in a detached way, of the exact places your body still belongs to you. The ball of each foot. Scar on your hip where the pin found numbness. The place under your tongue that remembers salt. You climb because climbing is what's left. From up here you can see the seam where town meets field, the way fences make geometry out of grass. A child somewhere starts crying high and thin and is swiftly shushed. The crowd has expectations for tone. Scholars still wrestle with what the scaffold accomplished beyond death. Was it meant as deterrence, a loud lesson hammered into the public eye, or as social glue, binding the community by offering them a ritual to share, even a terrible one? Some argue it was politics dressed as piety, elites managing fear by focusing it on a body. Others counter that many present must have doubted, or grieved, or at least felt a splinter under the nail of their certainty. There's even a quieter debate about the ground itself. For years, scholars argued about the precise spot of those New England hangings. Only recently did research settle on a rocky ledge, rather than the traditional hill. Place, like memory, blurs until someone pins it with evidence. The minister asks again, soft now, if you will pray with him. You nod, not because it changes anything, but because it dignifies your mouth for another 10 seconds. You catch scraps of words: valley, shadow table, house forever. The witchfinder watches with polite impatience, already counting the coin this day will add to his legend. The clerk's quill scratches, faithful as ever. The sky is offensively blue. A stray thought flits in. If the rope were to break, yes, you've heard it too, the crowd would shout omen, and the court would argue. Earlier you learned that ropes sometimes fail, that wood sometimes complains. For a breath you allow the superstition to skin your bones. Then you let it go. The end will be what it is, superstition or not. You look for your children in the sea of faces and don't find them. Good. Let them keep one mercy you can still deliver: absence. You think of the song, and it rises without sound, a private hum, out of the depths. Not a bargain, just a fact. You are here, and you are still a person right up to the very edge, no matter what the record will say. The executioner nods to the man at the horse's head. You feel everything at once. the rope scratch, the plank's stubborn give, your heart punching a last note on your ribs. The crowd inhales as one creature. For a ridiculous fragment of time you're aware of a fly tracing a lazy circle in sun, proof that another world keeps going even when yours is narrowed to wood, hemp, breath. Someone will swear later that a yellow bird perched on the beam, someone else will swear the sun dimmed. The clerk will write neither. You close your eyes, you think of water, of bread, of children's fingers, of weeds in a pond clutching ankles that kept kicking anyway. You think of your name, how it was smudged and sharpened and smudged again by 100 mouths. You think of a table in the presence of enemies and decide right now to picture your own instead. Plain board, chipped cup, a crust that rises this time. Your last act of defiance is domestic. Honestly, fitting. The horse shifts, the cart jolts, sunlight presses hot on your face and yes, feels like betrayal. The rope does its work, the crowd does theirs. The record will say you confessed or did not. It will name a date and perhaps the weather. It will not record the exact shade of blue, or the way a guard hummed a single note at dawn. That's all right. Those are yours. You carry them as far as a body can. After the cart rolls and the crowd exhales, the square remembers how to be a square again. You do not. The rope stops creaking. The clerk blots his page. The minister smooths his robe. The witchfinder checks his boots for mud he doesn't have. People peel away in clumps like bread pulled from a communal loaf, careful, warm, trying not to look at their fingers. A child asks for a sugared bun. Someone remembers a chore left half done. The gallows stays like a punctuation mark no one agrees on. You, meanwhile, become a grammar they'll argue about for years. Your body leaves the beam with less ceremony than it met it. There's a hurry now, a practical scuttle. Men with a cart, wood that complains, whispers that lower themselves to a respectful You're supposed to vanish neatly, to be filed away like the clerk's sheets. Yet the ground itself can be stubborn. It keeps imprints, it hoards small things. A shoe nail, a kicked pebble, the scuff from the executioner's boot. Later, when the square is empty, a fox will pace under the beam and find nothing useful there. Even scavengers prefer cleaner stories. Historically, families sometimes came by night to claim what the court tried to keep. In Salem there are accounts, thin, hesitant, of loved ones slipping up to the rocky rise, after dark, to lift bodies and carry them home, burying them in secret because shame had been written into law. Others never found that chance. They were left to the dirt near the site, names set adrift. Years later, the same communities that hanged them held a fast of atonement, 1697, and later still, 1711, reversed judgments for many and paid restitution, thin salves applied to old burns. Centuries after that, more names were cleared, apologies polished by distance. The wheel turned, as wheels do, over the tracks it laid itself. Here's a fringe truth that keeps wriggling through time. People keep charms from ugly days. A snippet of gallows rope stashed in a drawer for luck, a chip of beam carried in a pocket against toothache, a nail hammered above a door. Witch bottles chose up inside walls, clay flasks stuffed with pins and hair and urine, meant to ricochet harm back to sender. Masons leave little star scratches beside hearths. Mothers fasten rowan over lintels with scarlet thread. A town swears it has drained the fear, then bottles the dregs for later. You can roll your eyes, it's fair. Humans are collectors, anxiety loves a keepsake. Your children walk home under a sky offensively normal. Somewhere a dog barks in 3 sloppy beats, like bad drumming. A neighbour woman starts to speak and then thinks better of it. She has learned that mercy can be mislabelled as treason. The eldest counts steps because counting is a bridge over water. The youngest drags a stick along a fence, making a soft wooden zipper, sound that will return years later in her dreams. People turn toward their windows and pretend they aren't watching. Some are. Of course they are. Watching is the oldest habit in this story. The witchfinder leaves with his purse a little fatter, his ledger heavier, with a fresh line that reads like a boast and reads like an epitaph. Scholars will argue over men like him for as long as there are scholars. Were they zealous, fleecing towns in the name of order? Or were they sincere, victims of their own certainty? Both readings fit too well. Ambition and disbelief are cousins. They borrow each other's coats. He will die later, everyone does, and his name will stick for a while until it doesn't. Boots shine, paper fades, reputations do both. Meanwhile the clerk's pages get folded, tied with cord shelved. They will sleep for centuries like seeds in a jar, waiting for a new season of curiosity. When opened, they'll smell faintly of dust and iron gall ink, and someone will say, "Imagine, this is her voice," not realizing how much of you was flattened by his scratch, blot, dratch. Your careful answers are still there, just shorter, clipped like hedges. Historians will read between those lines like fortune-tellers staring at tea leaves. Was that hesitation sorrow or strategy? Was that denial faith or fear? The debates will feel earnest and important. They will not change your morning. The pond goes back to being a pond. Children will dare each other to touch its skin at dusk, because of course they will. Dares are another way of telling history with your feet. Older leaves will spit their papery hiss. A frog will sit like a tiny green magistrate on a root and consider flies. Someone will brag that they saw a yellow bird there once perching on a shoulder that wasn't attached to a body. The story grows feathers and lays eggs of its own. That's how myth breeds. A rumour curls up in a warm corner and wakes as a creature with eyes. Scholars keep hunting for the exact coordinates of past harm. Where precisely was the beam? Which rock had the view? Was it really a hill or a ledge? Ground shifts. Memory does origami. In your town, people will point 3 different directions when asked, each certain, each wrong, in a slightly different flavour. Years later, someone with a map and a shovel and a taste for primary sources will pin it down and put a marker there. Flowers will be left. A tourist will read the plaque and eat a pastry, wielding sympathy and sugar like a matched set. Both will be sincere. Both will be absurd. Human life is nothing if not multitasking. Your house won't sit empty forever. Someone will light a new fire there and complain as you did that the draft is ridiculous. The herbs you hung from the rafters will sprout in the spring without your hands because plants have no patience with our little moral panics. A cat will adopt the stoop. The new family will untie your old pieces of string and throw them away, thinking that they have cut history. History sheds. It is very good at that. Years slough off. The minister grows thinner. The guard who hummed a line becomes a father and swallows a lump in his throat when his child sings a psalm in a voice too much like the corridor's dawn. The baker perfects a new loaf. It rises, show off, and people moan and buy 2. No one mentions your old failure in the bowl. The story now prefers other morsels. Time edits. It always has a deadline. And then, in the long after, your name starts to shift. Sometimes it means caution. Don't let crowds keep their pitchforks in the pantry. Sometimes it means comfort. You were ordinary and still survived in memory, which is another kind of survival. Sometimes it's carved into classroom assignments and whispered in museums and used as a mirror by people checking their own faces for mob light. The tale gets tidied, then untidied, then staged with better lighting. You are blamed, pitied, exonerated, forgotten, rediscovered, hashtagged, footnoted. It's a lot for one person who once just wanted bread to rise. But underneath all that embroidery, the simple fabric stays. You were accused and alone, and you stood where anyone could stand if enough neighbours started pointing in the same direction. That is the sentence the world keeps revising and never quite finishes. You are the blank they fill in with themselves. And yes, that is a kind of peace if you tilt your head. Not the peace of gallows or apology or plaque, but the quiet in knowing that long after the rope stopped creaking, you kept a shape people could recognise and flinch from and learn by. You wanted a table. You became a lesson. It's not fair, it's human. If you listen hard, yes, even from here, you can still hear the market hum syncing with a psalm somewhere. The corridor tuning up with its wooden lilt choir. A child's stick zippering a fence. The gallows is gone, the fear nearly so. The song not at all. The silence after you is not empty. It's full of things that kept going, and one small rhythm you smuggled out like contraband, out of the depths and up again, into someone else's care. Word count, 1094. Wind down 300 words. You made it to the end, drifted across dark water and out the other side. Nice work, shake out your shoulders, unclench your jaw. Yeah, that last bit sneaks up, doesn't it? Let the room be small and kind around you for a moment. The big, sharp things can stay where we left them. Out there in the square, on an old paper behind museum glass. In here you've only got breath, a fan's hum, and the agreeable weight of your blanket. Take a slow inhale through your nose for 4, hold, and let it slide out for 6, again. You don't have to fix history tonight. You don't even have to remember it perfectly. It's enough to know that crowds are powerful, that stories can bruise, and that one good, ordinary human voice can still thread a corridor. Let that be the takeaway tucked under your pillow. Be wary of pointing fingers. And very generous with outstretched hands. Picture something soft, bread that actually rises this time, golden at the edges, crackling with whatever the opposite of fear is. Or picture the pond in summer, clocked with dragonflies, no ropes, no corridors, just light doing its lazy coin tricks on ripples. If a stray yellow bird shows up, let it perch, then fly off with the drama you don't need. You're allowed to keep only the song. If your thoughts try another lap, nod at them like familiar neighbours and let them pass. Inhale, kibu. Exhale, go. The fan steady as a psalm with training wheels. Your spine rounds heavier into the mattress. Your pillow learns your face again. Somewhere far away, a clerk finally puts down his quill. Somewhere closer. Your heartbeat chooses the slower rhythm because you ask nicely. Good call. We'll pick up another story another night. For now, let your eyes do the oldest magic. Close and open someplace restful.